George Brinkman Jr. did by force restrain the liberty of victim Suzanne Taylor at her residence to cause the death of Suzanne Taylor.
I'd like to say that I'm deeply sorry. This should have never happened. I understand the victim's frustrations.
They walked into court thinking they knew their fate, but what came next left everyone in shock. Some begged, some exploded, and some sat in silence as judges delivered the craziest sentences ever caught on camera. From life stacked for centuries to punishments that silence the courtroom. These are 54 sentences you'll never forget. And number 27, even the judge was speechless.
He went in that room to murder, to deliberately and intentionally end her life with a fatal dose of cyanide.
In a Colorado courtroom, a husband faced the family of the wife he vowed to love. Poisoned shakes, a chilling search history. The truth was that her killer was sitting right there. Angela Craig, 43, was a devoted wife and mother of 6 children. But in March 2023, her husband suddenly began to fail. Headaches, nausea, dizziness. Her husband, James Craig, offered to help by making her protein shakes. What she didn't know, those shakes carried a lethal secret. On March 15th, Angela was rushed to the hospital after a violent seizure. She never recovered. 3 days later, she was gone. Toxicology tests revealed cyanide and tetrahydrozoline, the chemical in eye drops, in her system. This was no illness. It was poison. Detectives began digging. They found James had searched for arsenic that could be detected in an autopsy. He had ordered potassium cyanide from Amazon and had it shipped to his dental office. The evidence was stacking up. Investigators also discovered James had been cheating on Angela for most of their 23-year marriage. At the time of her death, he was having an affair. He wasn't looking to fix his marriage. He was plotting his escape. And his escape plan was murder. Prosecutors said James wanted to avoid the shame of divorce, keep his image clean, and gain financially from Angela's death. Divorce was an option, but he refused it. Instead, he turned his wife's daily shake into a weapon.
We, the jury, unanimously and beyond a reasonable doubt, find the defendant, James Craig, guilty of murder in the first degree.
The jury didn't hesitate. James Craig was found guilty of first-degree murder and solicitation to murder, trying to hire another inmate to kill the lead detective. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 33 years. The moment the verdict hit, James broke. Tears streamed down his face. Angela's family remembered her as loving, kind, and devoted to her children. Angela's daughter said about Dad,
He was supposed to be my hero, and instead he'll forever be the villain in my book.
he turned love into murder with a poisoned shake. But our next case unleashes pure cruelty. 2 innocent lives silenced without a hint of remorse.
Scott made me do this. Heather made me do this. I didn't have a choice. Yeah, to Finger Park, to dispose of the body. You shook your head yes.
In a Colorado courtroom, a man sat shackled as families waited for justice. The crime? 2 vicious murders. The victims? A beloved trumpet player and a devoted mother. The killer? Kevin Eastman, whose violent actions shocked the entire community. And when the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted with raw emotion. In February 2020, police responded to an emergency call, which was first reported as a simple campfire. But when they arrived, it was clear this was no ordinary blaze. Inside, investigators discovered the remains of 2 victims. 53-year-old Scott Sessions, a celebrated trumpet player who brought music to countless community gatherings, and 48-year-old Heather Frank, a devoted mother whose life was cut short in a devastating way. Their lives were taken without warning, leaving families shattered. Both Scott and Heather had crossed paths with Kevin Eastman, and what followed was a story of cruelty that tore families apart. When the 2 first went missing, investigators immediately suspected foul play. They collected evidence, questioned witnesses, and began piecing together the disturbing events that would soon come to light. The trail pointed straight toward Kevin Eastman. What followed was a 3-week trial where prosecutors laid out the grim details of how both victims were killed. Eastman fatally stabbed Scott Session multiple times after luring him to Heather Frank's home. He then moved Scott's body to a rural area and set it on fire. Days later, fearing Frank might talk to the police, Eastman took her to a rural property near Greeley. There, he shot her twice in the chest at close range and tried to hide her body in a fire pit. On the night of the verdict, a jury found Kevin Eastman guilty of killing both Scott Sessions and Heather Frank. The courtroom was filled with raw emotion as family members waited for justice. While no single motive could explain such cruelty, prosecutors painted a picture of jealousy, anger, and control. What was clear is that Eastman's actions ended 2 lives and forever altered countless others. Judge Marcelo Kopkow handed down the punishment.
You're gonna spend the rest of your natural life in prison,
The judge again repeated his words.
and thereafter disposing of their deceased bodies in such a disrespectful manner. That's why you're gonna spend the rest of your life in prison.
Kevin Eastman's fate was sealed. 2 consecutive life sentences, plus 27 more years. He'll never walk free again, and when the verdict was read, he showed nothing. No tears. No emotion at all. During sentencing, family members shared heartbreaking statements. Scott's father spoke about the anguish their family now lives with, but also about the power of forgiveness. He said,
You'll find God in your life and that you will find a way to become a better person. You still have a chance.
2 lives were stolen, and the killer showed no remorse. But our next case reveals a dark secret beyond comprehension. 5 victims, 2 families, and 1 trusted friend who turned into a monster.
This happened because of work Friday.
Okay.
I got angry, I got upset. Real wall wins every time.
Yeah.
I found that out. That's Kylie, that's Taylor.
In an Ohio courtroom, George Brinkman Jr. sat shackled as prosecutors described the horror he had unleashed. 5 lives were lost, 2 families destroyed, all at the hands of a man they had once trusted. His name was George Brinkman Jr. He killed a mother in front of her daughters, smothered 1 child, strangled the other, then drove across town to kill a loving couple in their bedroom. This was not a random attack. It was betrayal at its deepest level. Brinkman had been friends with Suzanne Taylor since childhood. She trusted him enough to let him into her home, where she raised her 2 daughters, Taylor and Kylie. To the girls, he was almost like family. But on June 10th, 2017, that trust turned into terror. Brinkman held them captive inside their own house. What happened next left even seasoned investigators shaken. 2 days later, Taylor's boyfriend went to check on her. When he pulled into the driveway, he spotted something unusual.
And I pulled in, and then the kids and I all got out and went up to the door. And I usually just walk in, and it surprised me because all the cars were there, plus George's van was there.
When he went inside the house, Suzanne's bedroom door was shut. He opened it, and the nightmare revealed itself. Suzanne and her 2 daughters lay face down, their bodies covered with blankets. Police rushed to the scene. The evidence showed the ruthlessness. Suzanne was stabbed in front of her daughters. Taylor was smothered. Kylie was strangled. Investigators later found strands of Taylor's long hair cut off and scattered around the home. But Brinkman wasn't finished. After killing Suzanne and her daughters, he drove to the home of Roger Jean John and his wife, Roberta Bobby, a couple who had trusted him for years to watch over their home. That night, Brinkman forced his way into their bedroom. Jean was shot 3 times. Bobby was struck with the gun, fracturing her skull, before being shot twice. When it was over, Brinkman took cash from their wallets and fled. Why? Prosecutors pointed to obsession and resentment. Brinkman wanted more than friendship with Suzanne. With the Johns, years of tension boiled over. The rage he carried finally erupted into conflict. On June 12th, police closed in on Brinkman. He had barricaded himself inside a woman's home in Brunswick. The standoff lasted 9 tense hours. At one point, he even messaged a reporter on Facebook about the murders. Eventually, SWAT stormed in. Brinkman was subdued with a stun gun and arrested. In 2019, George was sentenced to death for the murders of Suzanne and her 2 daughters, as well as the murders of a couple, Jean and Bobby.
On June 10, 2017, in the city of North Royalton, George Brinkman Jr. did by force, threat, or deception restrain the liberty of the other person to terrorize or inflict serious physical harm on the victim or another.
In 2021, Brinkman's death sentence for killing Suzanne and her daughters was overturned, and in 2022, he received a life sentence without parole. Tears streamed out of his eyes as the verdict was read. He later confessed to the killings. However, his death sentence for the couple was upheld in July 2022, leaving him serving life for one case while still on death row for the other. His conviction for the first was overturned, but his sentence for the Johns remains. Brinkman now waits on death row, with an execution date set for September 23, 2026. The victim's father emotionally said,
"When he found them, murdering them one by one, he didn't show any mercy. Yet he has the audacity to ask this court, you, for mercy on him."
A death sentence couldn't erase the horror George left behind. However, the next case proves evil can come from somewhere even closer, a so-called friend who turned a young woman's life into horror.
I miss you every moment of every day.
The Kent County courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Ashley Young, 31, had been brutally dismembered, her head, hands, and feet never recovered. And the man accused, someone she once trusted. Ashley's mother rose, voice shaking with raw fury.
Jared Chance, I hate you. I want to rip you limb from limb and discard you like trash, like what you did to Ashley.
Every eye in the room widened, every breath caught. The horror of the crime and the heartbreak were impossible to ignore. Ashley had recently ended a long-term relationship and reconnected with an old acquaintance, 29-year-old Jared Chance. On the night of November 28, 2018, she told friends she was meeting him. Hours later, her phone went silent. The next day, she never showed up to sign the lease for her new apartment. Her mother and stepmother began a frantic search. Every call went unanswered, every lead a dead end. They were about to step into the middle of a nightmare. At first, Jared told Ashley's family that they had gone to a local pub and then parted ways, but his story quickly unraveled. Surveillance footage showed them together inside, yet never leaving. That same week, a resident at Jared's Grand Rapids apartment noticed a strange odor coming from the basement. When he went to check, he found something suspicious hidden under a tarp. Police were called and soon made a disturbing discovery. Upstairs, living in the same building, was Jared Chance. Inside, investigators found bloodstains, a missing shower curtain, and .22 caliber rounds. The morning after Ashley vanished, Jared was caught on camera buying cleaning supplies and throwing away her purse. Her head, hands, and feet were never recovered. Detectives soon learned Jared's parents, James and Barbara Chance, had driven to his apartment days after Ashley's disappearance. Evidence in their vehicle linked them to the crime, including a saw with tissue still on the blade. Both parents were arrested for helping cover up what Jared had done. To this day, the exact reason Jared killed Ashley remains unclear. Investigators believe she had rejected his romantic advances. Friends say Ashley always saw the good in people, but in Jared's case, there was none. Jared was charged with second-degree murder, mutilation of a body, and other crimes. In September 2019, he was found guilty and sentenced to 100 to 200 years in prison.
Sentence of this court with regards to the second-degree murder, that you be committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections to serve a minimum of 100 years to a maximum of 200 years.
Although he remained motionless as the verdict was announced, the judge said,
"I am purposely doing this so that you will not be eligible for parole."
His mother served 45 days for her role. His father received 1 year of probation for an accessory after the fact. Ashley's family still doesn't know where her remains are, and until they do, they cannot truly bring her home. Ashley's mother tearfully said in court,
Ashley, I miss you every moment of every day.
A mother's heartbreak. Her daughter's remains were never returned. But our next case is unlike any other, not driven by hatred, but by tragedy so extreme that even the judge called it unjust.
How do you feel about the fact that Mr. Ariano died?
Very badly. I wish that it had been me and not him.
In a Colorado courtroom, a young truck driver faced the verdict that would change his life forever. 4 people died, 27 guilty counts, a sentence so long even the judge called it unjust. But what started as a fiery crash in 2019 would ignite a legal storm that reached the governor's desk. The driver was 26-year-old Rogelio Aguilera Maderos, a Cuban immigrant hauling timber through the Rocky Mountain foothills. He said his brakes failed. Prosecutors said he knew they were failing and ignored the warning signs. What happened next would leave families shattered and the justice system under fire. According to investigators, Rogelio's truck sped downhill, weaving dangerously between vehicles. Witnesses said he passed at least one runway truck ramp designed for emergencies exactly like this, but he never took it. Seconds later, the semi slammed into stationary traffic. Flames erupted. Cars were crushed. 4 people lost their lives: 69-year-old Stanley Politano, 67-year-old William Bailey, 61-year-old Doyle Harrison, and 24-year-old Miguel Angel Lamas Arellano. When the case went to trial, the verdict was guilty. 27 counts in total. Judge Bruce Jones made it clear that under Colorado law, his hands were tied. Each mandatory minimum sentence had to be served consecutively, resulting in a staggering 110 years behind bars. As the verdict was read, tears streamed down his face. Even the judge admitted,
"And if I had the discretion, it would not be my sentence."
Prosecutors said Rogelio's actions were reckless and avoidable. Rogelio insisted the crash was an accident, a dreadful mechanical failure he tried desperately to control. The sentence sparked outrage across the country. More than 5 million people signed a petition for clemency, and truck drivers vowed to boycott Colorado. Then the governor stepped in, calling it a disastrous but unintentional act. Jared Polis reduced the sentence to 10 years, making Rogelio eligible for parole in 5. Next up, she told police she was a hostage, but investigators uncovered the truth. Janine Jaramillo caused the chase that killed 2 innocent men.
March 2022. It's another instance where the truth is different from how it initially appears. Let's take a look.
Life in prison, just for a wrong-way chase. Janine Jaramillo's deadly drive tore through a community, leaving heartbreak and unanswered questions. Her lies and reckless choices ended 2 lives, lives that belonged to local heroes, Officer Robert Duran and firefighter Frank Lovato. On March 2, 2022, Santa Fe police received a frantic emergency call. On the line was 46-year-old Janine Jaramillo, claiming her boyfriend had kidnapped her at knife point. Officers quickly responded to the call, unaware that it would ultimately lead to a tragic outcome. The problem began when the call turned into a high-speed chase. Police followed Jaramillo through the streets of Santa Fe. Instead of stopping, she pushed the gas harder, dangerously weaving through traffic. Moments later, she steered onto Interstate 25, but in the wrong direction. Driving against traffic at high speed, Jaramillo's car slammed head-on into another vehicle. When police questioned her about the incident, one investigator pressed, "What cannot be explained?"
Cannot be explained is you getting hit in the head so hard by a man that he knocks you out, and there's not a bruise, there's not a welt.
How do they know? How do you know there's no bruises on my head?
But it was the investigator's next words that stunned both Janine and the community. After the investigation, it was revealed that the crash killed 2 respected members of the community: Santa Fe police officer Robert Duran and retired Las Vegas firefighter Frank Lovato. Court testimony painted a clear picture of what happened next. Jaramillo had told police she was kidnapped, but evidence showed she lied. She was under the influence of a substance and made reckless choices that cost 2 lives. Prosecutors said there was no plan to kill, but her lies and reckless driving were fueled by substance mistreatment and an attempt to avoid responsibility. Officer Duran's family later shared that he was trying to protect her life when he died, a heartbreaking truth. In August 2024, inside a Santa Fe courtroom, a jury found Jaramillo guilty on all counts, including 2 charges of first-degree murder. Judge Mary Marlowe Sommer sentenced her to life in prison for each murder, a total of 60 years, to be served back-to-back. She will never be released. However, she showed no emotion for her actions.
State of New Mexico versus Janine Jaramillo, we find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in count 2.
Families of both victims spoke about their grief and the emptiness left behind. Some, like Duran's sister, chose not to hold hate in their hearts, saying they wouldn't let Jaramillo take away their peace. Others, like Duran's wife, asked for the maximum sentence, not out of anger, but to protect others. 2 heroes gone, and not a hint of remorse from the woman who caused it. But our next case takes betrayal to a level that's almost impossible to imagine. A grandmother helping plan the murder of her grandchild's mother.
Has your mother ever said anything to you? Motivated you, enticed you, wanted you, manipulated you to, or anything else to take Brooklyn Sims' life?
No, sir.
On August 11th, 2023, the peaceful routine inside a Pensacola Home Depot was shattered by a tragedy that no one saw coming. That morning, 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims, a young mother who worked hard to provide for her 2-year-old child, arrived for her shift. Her day began like any other, but within hours, she would lose her life in an act of calculated violence. Brooklyn Sims was in a relationship with Keith A.G., the 20-year-old father of her child, but as time passed, their relationship grew strained, filled with tension and conflict. What no one saw coming was the dark role Keith's mother, 52-year-old Sheila A.G., would play. Instead of trying to bring peace, Sheila chose to side completely with her son. She didn't just watch from the sidelines. She became an active part of her son's deadly plan. Keith drove from Alabama to the Home Depot parking lot that day. Minutes later, he walked inside and shot Brooklyn while she worked. Customers and employees fled in panic as the horror unfolded. Brooklyn died before help could reach her. As the investigation unfolded, the truth began to surface. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and a series of text messages painted a chilling picture. That morning, Sheila drove Brooklyn to work, acting as if everything was normal. But behind the scenes, her phone revealed a darker story. Authorities uncovered texts between Sheila and Keith where they planned to attack ahead of time. In one shocking message, Sheila urged her son, "If you don't come kill her, you a MF bitch." She even sent him a map of the store and warned him not to shoot near her car. According to Keith, the conflict was fueled by anger after he claimed he'd contracted an STD from Brooklyn, a claim that was later proven false. 6 days before the shooting, Brooklyn had sent Sheila a picture from a doctor's visit confirming she was healthy. The case went through 2 trials. Keith was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder in December 2023 and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Sheila's first trial ended in a mistrial, but in her second trial, the jury found her guilty of principal to first-degree premeditated murder. However, she showed no emotion for her actions. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community was left in disbelief and outrage. The idea that a mother would help her son plan the murder of the mother of her grandchild shocked everyone. Even more disturbing, the night before her arrest, Sheila attended an honorary balloon release for Brooklyn, pretending to grieve alongside others. A mother's role is to protect, but here it became a weapon. And in our next case, the weapon wasn't a gun, it was a fire. Flames so destructive, they took an innocent life and left a community terrified.
Gasoline, a Starbucks bottle that matched the fire at South 54th Street, other items belonging to Metro Parks.
In late 2021 and early 2022, the communities of Tacoma and nearby Ruston were gripped by fear as a wave of destruction swept through. Homes, garages, and cars were going up in flames, leaving residents scared and searching for answers. At first, no one knew who was responsible, but soon, the truth would shock them all. Then, on New Year's Eve 2021, one fire took a terrible toll, and an 83-year-old man lost his life. At first, this fire was thought to be an accident, but as more fires started popping up, the police began to suspect something much more serious. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department, along with Tacoma police and federal agencies like the ATF, launched a major investigation. Using police dogs, they quickly found evidence that the New Year's Eve fire was not an accident, but had been set on purpose. After the investigation, 42-year-old Sarah Ramey was arrested. A search of her truck uncovered stolen mail, keys, gasoline containers, and even belongings linked to a man who died in the fire. These findings raised serious questions and heightened suspicion. Police also learned that Sarah was near the location of several fires and even had a special torchlighter when she was caught. Plus, her phone was tracked near the scene of the deadly fire for hours, linking her to the crime. Sarah Ramey faced serious charges: murder, arson for 13 fires, attempted arson, burglary, identity theft, and motor vehicle theft. During the trial, victims shared their stories, like Janine Mitchell, whose garage, carport, and car were destroyed. The fires also took precious keepsakes that meant a lot to her family. While the exact reason behind Sarah's actions remains unclear, the destruction and fear she caused were very real for the community. On July 23, 2024, the jury found Sarah Ramey guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 82 years in prison, ensuring she will not be able to harm anyone else. For victims like Janine Mitchell, the verdict brought relief after years of fear. She hopes Sarah will never be free again, so the neighborhood can finally feel safe. Some neighbors said,
"What affected our family and so many of the other families."
The fires may be out, but the damage will never fade. Now we turn to a case that raises a haunting question. What if the person convicted is telling the truth when they say they're innocent?
They got it completely wrong.
You say you blacked out at the moment your husband was being murdered. But people watching might think, that sounds so convenient.
Yeah.
In December 2012, Sarah Melgar's life changed forever. That night, she and her husband Jim were celebrating their 32nd wedding anniversary at their home near Houston, Texas. What started as a joyful evening ended in heartbreak when Jim was found dead, and Sandra was accused of a crime she says she didn't commit. Sandra always maintained her innocence. She told police that someone broke into their home, tied her up, locked her in a closet, and killed Jim. But the authorities saw it differently. They believed Sandra had stabbed Jim 31 times in their bedroom closet, a crime scene with no signs of forced entry. The evidence: prosecutors said the murder weapon was found in the house and that Sarah had no injuries or signs of a struggle. When family members found the couple's vehicles outside but no answer at the door, Jim's brother went inside. He found Sandra tied up in the closet and Jim dead from stab wounds. The house was ransacked, with missing items and a strange backpack left behind. Sarah was taken for questioning, but the district attorney initially refused to press charges due to a lack of evidence. Yet, during the trial, prosecutors painted a very different picture. Despite no physical evidence linking Sandra to the murder, no blood from Jim on her, no DNA under her nails, and no signs that she left the closet, prosecutors argued that the murder weapon was found in the house and that there was no forced entry. This led them to suspect Sandra. However, many legal experts say that convictions based mainly on theories and circumstantial evidence can be flawed. Still, after a 13-day trial, the jury convicted Sandra, and she was sentenced to 27 years in prison. When the verdict was read, she showed no signs of regret because she didn't believe what happened to her. According to her, she is innocent. Prosecutors claimed jealousy and passion fueled the murder, but Sandra told a different story. She said she and Jim had planned a future full of travel and retirement together. On their last night, they had shared dreams in the jacuzzi. Jim had gone to let the dogs in, and that was the last time she saw him alive. Since her conviction, Sandra has fought to prove her innocence. The Innocence Project of Texas took up her case in 2022, pointing out major flaws in the prosecution's story. New DNA evidence from blood on Jim's safe doesn't match Sandra or anyone in her family. It belongs to an unknown man. Her family has now offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the real killer. Sandra remains behind bars, but continues to hope for justice. Sandra says that every day in prison feels like a nightmare. She misses Jim deeply and faces ongoing health challenges. Yet she holds on to hope to one day be free, share her story, and watch her grandchildren grow up. Our next case is different. The killer admitted what happened, but a shocking legal twist may set her free.
I admitted to an accident, not to premeditated.
So you're saying that that Janet Kelly's death was just an accident?
Yeah, the video speaks for itself.
In December 2007, 60-year-old Janet Kelly vanished from her home in Grand Rapids. Months later, her body was discovered in a remote field, leaving police with more questions than answers. When investigators examined the scene, they found that Janet had been badly injured and tied up, showing clear signs of a violent attack. DNA evidence was collected that could have identified the person responsible, but for reasons still unclear, it wasn't sent to the state crime lab for testing until several years later. Nearly a decade after her death, a surprising confession breathed new life into the case, proving that the story was far from over. Cold case detectives reopened the investigation in 2014. That's when the DNA evidence was finally tested, leading police back to Root. In April 2015, after a 6-year police interview, Root confessed to the killing. She told officers that Kelly was angry with her for not paying rent, and during an argument, she pushed Kelly. Root claimed it was an accident, that Kelly fell, hit her head, and lost consciousness. In a panic, Root said she hid the body and tried to cover up the crime. Root's legal team argued that the police violated her rights by not informing her of her Miranda rights during the interview. Despite this, the court denied the motion to suppress her confession. In December 2015, Robin Root was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The motive was financial. Root owed Kelly back rent and feared the consequences. The tragic argument led to Kelly's death and an attempt to hide the crime. Recently, the Michigan Court of Appeals ruled that Root's conviction must be overturned. They found that the trial court made a mistake by allowing her confession without properly informing her of her rights. Because of this violation, her statements for the 2015 interrogation cannot be used as evidence. As a result, her conviction was overturned and a new trial was ordered. This decision shocked many. A case once thought closed is now reopened. For Kelly's family, it's another painful chapter, while for Root, someone from his family said, "I hope there will be a time when you can give Dana the truth of what did happen and give her the peace you owe her." Our next case is fueled by obsession, betrayal, and cold-blooded revenge. Elizabeth Cooper didn't just lose control, she planned to kill.
Last week, she's since racked up 4 more felonies related to an attempted escape, which did not go over well.
On a routine Thursday at the Kenosha County Courthouse, an unexpected and dramatic event unfolded. Elizabeth Cooper, a 30-year-old woman from Twin Lakes, made a last-ditch attempt to escape justice, but her plan quickly fell apart. Cooper was in court facing a reckless homicide charge. Authorities say she provided substances to a friend who later died from an overdose. As she stood before the judge, she may have been hoping for leniency. But instead of being allowed to go home, the judge revoked her bond. A deputy was ordered to take her straight to jail until her trial. That's when panic set in. A deputy placed Cooper in handcuffs and began escorting her out of the courtroom. Everything seemed normal until the unexpected happened. While walking toward the elevator, the deputy got a call on his radio and was briefly distracted. In that moment, Cooper managed to slip one hand out of the cuffs and made a run for it. Surveillance cameras captured the chase as she sprinted down the courthouse staircase, desperate for an exit. As Sheriff David Beth later explained, the reality of going to jail hit her all at once, and she acted on impulse. Some people, especially those with smaller hands, can pull out of their cuffs, which is exactly what she did. She wasn't thinking about the consequences, just the chance to get away. But her escape attempt didn't last long.
Especially with women, if they have very small hands and small features, they can actually pull their hands out of a set of handcuffs.
A security guard near the courthouse entrance saw her running and tackled her before she could make it outside. Meanwhile, the deputy who had been escorting her tried to chase after her, but injured his knee in the process. He's expected to recover. Now, instead of just facing reckless homicide charges, Cooper has been hit with 3 new felonies: bail jumping, escaping criminal arrest, and resisting an officer, for which a preliminary hearing is scheduled for January 19, 2024, and a pretrial conference for her original charge on February 16, 2024. And according to the charges, the judge sentenced her up to 6 years in prison and fines up to $10,000 for bail jumping, felony, the same for escape from custody, and 9 months in jail and fines up to $10,000 for resisting or obstructing an officer. Sheriff Beth later commented that while courthouse escapes are rare, they do happen. He recalled a similar incident 25 years ago, when someone managed to run away from him inside the courthouse. Cooper's desperate attempt at freedom may have been impulsive, but it only made things worse. Instead of escaping, she sealed her fate, and now faces even more serious legal consequences. Our next case is more haunting. This time, a reckless decision cost an innocent man his life.
So your actions that night took my partner, my world, my everything!
In 2019, Alondra Marquez, 22, caused a fatal DUI crash in San Diego, killing Zhao Pham and injuring Andy Lin. She was sentenced to over 13 years in prison. During sentencing, Marquez interrupted victim statements, leading to a heated exchange. It was supposed to be a fun getaway. Zhao Pham and his friend Andy Lin had traveled from San Francisco to San Diego for a wedding. The two spent their evening at a bar in Hillcrest before calling a Lyft to take them back safely. But that same night, 22-year-old Alondra Marquez made a dangerous choice. Despite multiple offers for a ride, she decided to drive herself. That decision led to a tragic accident, costing an innocent man his life. Marquez was well over the legal limit, yet she still chose to drive. She sped down Highway 163 in Balboa Park at a staggering 109 miles per hour, putting herself and others in danger. Within seconds, disaster struck. Marquez's car slammed into the back of the Lyft carrying Pham and Lin. The force of the crash sent the vehicle flying into a ravine. The Lyft driver managed to escape with minor injuries, but Pham was not as lucky. He lost his life on impact. Lin survived, but suffered a traumatic brain injury that would change his life forever. Officers arrived to find the Lyft vehicle wrecked in a ravine. The shaken driver provided a first-hand account, while detectives gathered evidence, including skid marks and surveillance footage showing Marquez speeding without braking. Marquez was found near her damaged car, appearing disoriented, struggling to speak clearly, and showing signs of impairment. She was unable to pass a field sobriety test. With previous offenses and a suspended license, she faced serious charges, including reckless driving resulting in a tragic loss and causing severe injuries. As the case moved forward, prosecutors sought the harshest penalties possible. However, the defendant's defense tried to convince that it was an accident, but still, it can give peace to the victim's family.
Has shown remorse, but then she almost takes it back. I'm sorry for the victim's family, but it was an accident.
At Marquez's sentencing, the courtroom was filled with grief and rage. 13 people flew in from San Francisco to speak on behalf of Pham and Lin. The most heartbreaking words came from John Lawhead, Pham's life partner of 11 years.
We were together for almost 11 years until your actions that night took my partner, my world, my everything! But you still don't have no remorse in your heart. You are very shallow, aren't you?
But instead of showing remorse, Marquez interrupted and mumbled, "I don't care." What made this tragedy even worse was that it was completely preventable. Marquez had 5 chances to make the right choice. 5 different people had offered to give her a ride that night, but she ignored them all. She wanted to drive, at any cost. Instead of choosing safety, she chose recklessness, and in doing so, she stole a life. Despite the heartbreaking testimonies, Marquez remained emotionless. She read from a prepared statement, showing no real regret for what she had done.
I remember, I realized that I really messed up. Clearly, I took someone's life, unfortunately. I just want you guys to know that I didn't do it on purpose.
Lawhead held up a picture of Pham's gravesite. "This is what I see when I go visit him now. Do you understand your actions now?" But Marquez had nothing meaningful to say. She simply asked for forgiveness. She said, "I'm sorry. I know you guys are hurting." And finally, Marquez was condemned for 13 years and 4 months with the possibility of parole after 9 years. Her words only added to the anger in the room. Lawhead, filled with grief, told her something he never thought he would say to another human being.
But you still don't have no remorse in your heart. You are very shallow, aren't you? You're a very shallow person, aren't you?
Marquez pleaded guilty and faced a maximum sentence of 13 years and 4 months in prison. But for Pham's loved ones, no sentence would ever bring him back. The man they loved was gone forever. Our next case begins with a quiet home in Essex and ends with Virginia McCullough accused of killing her elderly parents and hiding their bodies for years.
I did know that this would kind of come eventually. It's proper that I serve my punishment. Cheer up, at least you caught the bad guy.
For 4 years, no one suspected a thing. Friends and neighbors believed Virginia McCullough's parents, John and Janice McCullough, had simply moved away. But behind the doors of their Essex home, a dark secret festered. Their bodies lay hidden in a makeshift tomb, while Virginia continued her daily life as if nothing had happened. The truth behind their gruesome fate would only come to light after a shocking confession, one that left police struggling to comprehend the depths of her deception. In August 2019, Virginia murdered both her parents, though exactly how she did it remains unclear. What is known is that John and Janice never left their home alive. Instead of reporting their deaths, Virginia wrapped their bodies in plastic and blankets, hiding them inside their home for years. She lied to family, friends, and neighbors, telling them her parents had moved abroad. She continued to collect their pensions, living in their house as if nothing had changed. But as time passed, suspicions grew. Relatives hadn't heard from John or Janice in years, and when the police were finally called for a welfare check in September 2023, Virginia's secret unraveled. She greeted the officers at the door with a chilling statement: "You've caught the bad guy." Inside, police found the decomposed remains of her parents, wrapped and hidden inside the home. Virginia McCullough's motive was a twisted mix of control, financial gain, and resentment. She had become dependent on her parents' money, relying on their pensions and savings to fund her life of deception. But there was more than greed driving her actions. Investigators discovered that Virginia had a history of conflict with her parents. Reports suggested that she resented their authority and felt trapped under their control. To her, their deaths weren't just about money, they were about freedom. By eliminating them, she was able to live her life on her own terms, without restrictions, without accountability, and without anyone questioning her. With her secret exposed, Virginia was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. In court, the disturbing details of her crime were laid bare. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had coldly planned the cover-up, deceiving everyone around her while living among the bodies of her victims. Her defense argued that mental health struggles played a role, but the jury wasn't convinced. Virginia McCullough was found guilty of both murders and sentenced to life in prison. For years, she had pretended her parents were still alive, but in the end, justice caught up with her. In the courtroom, the weight of the truth finally crashed down. Relatives of John and Janice were left stunned by the sheer horror of the crime. The idea that Virginia had lived for years with their bodies, lying to everyone she knew, was almost too much to process. To many, she wasn't just a murderer. She was a master manipulator, capable of keeping up a chilling charade for nearly half a decade. For her parents, there were no goodbyes, no final words, only a betrayal by the daughter they had raised. Next up, a PhD student in criminology who studied crime by day and prosecutors say committed it by night. Brian Kohberger's arrest stunned the country.
Has anyone offered you a reward of any kind other than the plea agreement in order to get you to plead guilty today?
No.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
In the still cold hours before dawn on November 13th, 2022, a nightmare unfolded in the quiet town of Moscow, Idaho. Inside a seemingly ordinary off-campus house, 4 University of Idaho students were brutally killed while they slept. At first, nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no one had been restrained, and nothing had been stolen.
This happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
2 roommates survived that night. One of them, Dylan Mortensen, recalled hearing strange noises and even saw a masked figure walk past her, but she was in shock and didn't call an emergency until the next day. When officers arrived, the scene was deeply unsettling. All 4 victims had suffered multiple injuries. It wasn't just a tragic loss, it was an alarming incident. As panic swept through the university, law enforcement launched one of its largest investigations in Idaho's history. The FBI, state police, and local officers worked around the clock. They found security camera footage of a white Hyundai Elantra circling the area several times around the time of the murders. Cell phone data showed that the driver had turned off his phone near the victim's house and turned it back on after the murders. Inside the home, investigators found a tan leather knife sheath next to one of the victims. On it, a single drop of DNA. That clue changed everything. The DNA didn't match anyone in criminal databases, so investigators turned to genealogy websites to track the family tree. That path led them straight to Brian Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD criminology student from nearby Washington State University. When police finally caught up with him, he was at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He was wearing surgical gloves and quietly separating trash into Ziploc bags. Authorities arrested him on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. Kohberger had no connection to the victims, but his phone data showed he had been near the victim's house multiple times before the murders, stalking them. Some believe he wanted to prove he could commit the perfect crime, using his academic knowledge of criminal behavior, but his planning failed because even the smallest mistake, like leaving behind a knife sheath, was enough to uncover the truth. After pleading not guilty for months, Kohberger shocked the court in July 2025.
$1,000 and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim.
To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without eligibility for parole, plus 10 years for burglary and $270,000 in fines and restitution. Despite the gravity of his crimes, he showed no remorse.
You have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining. I respectfully decline.
He also agreed to never appeal, meaning he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. 4 young lives full of dreams, friendships, and futures taken in the middle of the night. One of the victim's sisters said to him,
"The truth is, you're as dumb as they come. Stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy."
And families and communities are still asking the one question that may never fully be answered. Our next case shows that sometimes the greatest threat isn't outside your home, it's sitting at your family table.
Was very brutal.
With what's referred to as a blue moon.
In Pensacola, a silent house held a dark secret. Richard Smith had vanished. When officers checked inside, they found his entire family murdered. The killer wasn't a stranger. It was someone they trusted, Donald Hartung, and it all happened just days before a rare blue moon lit the sky. On July 31st, 2015, police entered the home of 77-year-old Von Seal Smith and her sons, John and Richard Smith, only to discover all 3 brutally murdered. The bodies were found in different rooms, partially covered by blankets. John and Von Seal had been beaten and stabbed. Richard had a gunshot wound to the head. The horror wasn't just in the crime scene. It was the idea that someone had done this to an entire family, inside their own home. When police first arrived, they spoke with the one remaining family member, Donald Hartung, Von Seal's oldest son. He had permitted officers to enter the home, but what struck investigators was not what he said, but how he said it. It was like he had already rehearsed it in his mind. There were no tears, no regret, just silence. Detective Matt Infinger still remembers how Donald showed no emotion at all, not even a flicker of sadness, when told his entire family was dead. He was oddly calm, cold even. This behavior immediately raised red flags. When they searched Donald's home, things only got stranger. Investigators discovered a worship room filled with spiritual items and a Ouija board. Since the murders happened around the time of a blue moon, some wondered if this could have been a ritualistic killing, but experts later denied any direct connection to religious rituals.
The money that he knew he was never going to get unless and until all 3 of his family members died.
According to the prosecutor, the motive began to come into focus, and it had nothing to do with magic, only money. Von Seal Smith's will revealed she had left everything to her 2 younger sons, John and Richard, and purposely left Donald out. She noted that he already had sufficient assets, but Donald knew he'd never get the money unless all 3 of them were gone, and that's exactly what happened. The total money in their bank accounts was nearly $900,000. It was greed, cold and calculated. Donald Hartung wanted an inheritance that was never meant for him. So, he chose murder as his solution, taking the lives of his mother and brothers, the very people who trusted him most.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Donald Hartung, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
The case went to trial years later, and the jury didn't need long to decide. Donald Hartung was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. However, he chose to remain silent while the verdict was read. The court sentenced him to 3 life sentences without the chance of parole. He now serves time at Graceville Correctional and Rehabilitation Facility in Florida.
As far as a motive,
They believe the motive is money, but don't know if Hartung knew he'd been cut out of the will.
Even after all this time, the relatives of the Smith family still remember the case vividly, not just for the brutality, but for the cold, calculated way Donald handled it all. The Blue Moon murders were not only a tragedy, they were a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers, they're family. Our next case shows that evil doesn't always knock on your door. Sometimes you walk right into its trap.
That will haunt you the rest of your life in your 4x8 cell. You're a worthless monster.
In the fall of 2011, people across Ohio were looking for work. Times were tough. So when a Craigslist job ad appeared offering free room and board in exchange for farm work, it seemed like a dream come true. But for 4 men, this ad wasn't an opportunity. It was a deadly trap. One by one, job seekers responded to the ad, hoping to start a new chapter in life. Instead, they walked straight into a nightmare. 3 of them would never return home. The man behind it all? A 53-year-old man named Richard Beasley. And helping him, shockingly, was a 16-year-old boy named Brogan Rafferty. The case began to unravel when one man lived to tell the tale. Scott Davis, a 49-year-old from South Carolina, arrived at the so-called farm for what he thought was a job interview. But as he walked ahead of Beasley, he heard the unmistakable click of a gun. In that split second, everything changed. Even after being shot in the arm, Davis fought back and escaped into the woods. His bravery would become the turning point, leading police straight to the killers.
Given the chance to make a final impression on the jury, the defense focused not on Beasley's brutal crimes, but the abuse he suffered decades ago.
As detectives dug deeper, the horror unraveled. Beasley and Rafferty had been using Craigslist to lure victims with a fake job ad, then robbing and killing them. 3 innocent men lost their lives. The 4th survived and became the voice for the voiceless in court. So why did they do it? Prosecutors said it was all for greed. Richard Beasley, deeply in debt and desperate, wanted easy money. The job ad was just a way to isolate victims in a remote location and steal from them. But things turned fatal.
The 53-year-old lured men down on their luck through a phony Craigslist job ad. The bogus ad promised work as a caretaker on a farm in Noble County.
In 2013, justice finally came. Beasley was found guilty of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and attempted murder. A jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge agreed. As the verdict was announced, Beasley sat in his wheelchair, still claiming he's innocent, and said, "I say here today officially for the record, I have killed nobody." His head was down. Though he claimed he was innocent, the court was convinced. His young accomplice, Brogan Rafferty, was sentenced to life without parole, too young for the death penalty, but old enough to face the consequences. In court, the families of the victims held back tears as the sentence was read. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about closure. These were fathers, brothers, and sons who simply wanted a job. Our next case shows how a first date turns into a real-life horror film.
Us to even be here, I'm going to have to ask. I wanted to go before my daughter because I need her to be protected by this heavy demonic energy that is residual in this courtroom, this devil.
On April 1st, 2024, Shade Robinson, a bright college student from Milwaukee, went out on a first date. She had met a man named Maxwell Anderson just a week earlier at a local bar. Shade was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, full of dreams and energy. Her friends and family had no idea this would be the last time they'd see her alive. The next morning, Shade didn't come home. Her phone was off and no one could reach her. As hours turned into days, her loved ones grew increasingly concerned. Then came troubling news. Part of her remains had been found near a local park. Investigators were called in, and what they uncovered next was deeply unsettling. Authorities soon identified the suspect, Maxwell Anderson, the same man Shade had recently gone on a date with. As the investigation continued, more of her remains were discovered in separate locations, including near a playground and along the shoreline in South Milwaukee. Some parts were never recovered. Maxwell Anderson had invited Shade to his apartment after their date. Surveillance video and cell phone data confirmed she never left. Investigators also discovered disturbing photos on his phone, images of him groping Shade while she lay face down on the couch, likely unconscious. It's believed that she was killed shortly after, then dismembered. Even more disturbing, Anderson then drove her car to an abandoned building, set it on fire, and took a bus home. He tried to cover his tracks, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson, and hiding a corpse.
I was a part of the search team, so we had the Wisconsin State Crime Lab coming to help with the search of the residence, as well as members from the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office.
During the investigation, horrifying details were shared in court. Anderson had dismembered Shade's body and left her remains in different places across Milwaukee. Prosecutors said the crime was carefully planned and showed no signs of mercy. Despite the evidence, Anderson claimed he was innocent and said a stranger must have taken Shade after she left his apartment, something no one believed. Prosecutors argued that Anderson killed Shade when she became vulnerable or tried to resist. His motives remained unclear, but his actions showed cruelty and a disturbing need to cover up what he had done. Anderson's lawyer asked the court to consider parole after 25 years, saying Anderson had served in the U.S. Navy and struggled with mental health issues, but the judge refused. On August 1, 2025, Maxwell Anderson was sentenced to life in prison without the eligibility of parole. He was also given more than 9 years for the other charges. However, while apologizing for his actions, he tried to prove himself innocent. "I didn't commit these crimes, and so I plan to appeal my convictions, while I hope and pray that further investigations not only prove my innocence, but find and deliver true justice."
When Maxwell Anderson murdered my sister, he redefined my definition of misfortune. No amount of financial hardships, disputes, or everyday struggles were even in the same realm as the effect of the loss he created.
In court, Shade's parents gave emotional victim impact statements. Her mother said Anderson messed the entire community up. Her father said everything he did should be done to him. The courtroom was filled with anger, pain, and disbelief. The judge, Laura Crivello, called Anderson's crimes unconscionable and said the case felt like something from a horror story. She also said his view of reality differs from the rest of the world. Our next case reveals a man who took the life of a hero, all to run from the consequences of his own actions.
I understand that, bruh. But there ain't much more you can do to me, man.
In a small Virginia town, a young officer responded to what seemed like a routine call on a quiet November morning. But before the sun rose, tragedy struck without warning. On November 13th, 2021, just after dawn, Officer Michael Chandler was dispatched to conduct a welfare check at a home in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. It appeared to be a standard call, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Chandler arrived, he noticed something unusual. A car in the driveway was preparing to leave. Sensing something wasn't right, he radioed for backup. What he didn't realize was that inside the car sat Michael Donovan White, a man desperate to avoid capture. White told the woman to drive away quickly with him. There were illegal substances in the vehicle, and he was clear about one thing: he wasn't going back to jail. As Officer Chandler approached the vehicle, Michael White suddenly took off, but fate intervened. The car became stuck in the grass. He couldn't escape. Officers began to close in. Then, without warning, White pulled out a gun. From behind the driver's side window, he fired 8 shots. 2 bullets struck Officer Chandler. 1 hit his wrist, and the other landed just below his bulletproof vest. That morning, Chandler was rushed to the hospital. Despite every effort to save him, he passed away later that day from his injuries. He was only 29 years old.
We are asking for your prayers for this particular officer as he continues to receive medical treatment.
The search for Michael White intensified. Investigators soon linked him not only to Officer Chandler's death, but also to serious federal offenses. Authorities revealed he had been involved in illegal drug activity. Court records painted a grim picture. White wasn't just fleeing jail. He was running from a life of crime that was crumbling fast. Why did he harm a police officer? The answer is as tragic as it is troubling. White was afraid of going back to prison. He had illegal substances in his car and a criminal history. In a moment of panic, he made a terrible decision, thinking it was his only escape.
Those charges, it appeared that White was yawning and smiling. You can see part of that right here. White, who was appointed an attorney, requested a speedy trial.
On May 30th, 2024, justice finally caught up with him. Michael Donovan White pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 100 years in prison. But during sentencing, he showed no emotion. Instead, he yawned and smiled.
You, as a defendant, did commit aggravated murder. That is a Class 1 felony. It carries mandatory life in prison.
That wasn't all. On February 28, 2025, in federal court, he received an additional 100-year sentence for multiple drug-related offenses. The charges included conspiracy, illegal possession of a firearm, and operating a property used for unlawful activities. Today, White remains in custody, awaiting permanent placement in a federal prison, where he'll spend the rest of his life. Michael Chandler's wife, Natasha, an investigator with the Wise County Sheriff's Office, spoke through tears. While the sentencing doesn't bring Michael back, it offers closure. He died, protecting our community. Her words, filled with grief and strength, echoed across the courtroom. The loss of Officer Chandler can never be undone. But the community he served will never forget his courage, his kindness, and his sacrifice. Next up, a calculated setup that ended in horror. Joseph McAlpin lured his victims to their deaths, then tried to outsmart the justice system on his own.
If you was man enough to go in there and rob and kill that family, why are you not man enough to tell everybody in this courtroom what you did?
In 2017, a quiet family-owned car dealership in Cleveland, Ohio became the scene of a chilling crime. Joseph McAlpin walked through its doors with one plan in mind: stealing cars. But what happened next was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined, leaving a family shattered and a community in shock. On a regular day at Mr. Cars, the owners, Michael Kuznick, and his wife, Trina Tomola Kuznick, were working hard to provide for their family. They had no idea that danger was about to walk through their door. McAlpin, along with two other men who waited nearby, came not just to take property, but to take lives. When the couple's son came to the dealership later that day, he was met with a heartbreaking scene. His parents were found dead inside the office with their pet. The police were called immediately. Detectives began piecing together what had happened. Surveillance footage and evidence pointed straight to McAlpin. Prosecutors said that after a serious incident involving the couple and their pet, McAlpin and his accomplices stole two cars and drove away, leaving behind devastation. As the case progressed, more details emerged. McAlpin had been the one to pull the trigger, while the other two waited down the street. The motive was simple. He wanted to steal vehicles. But in his attempt to take what wasn't his, he committed a brutal double killing. When the trial began, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Investigators learned that McAlpin planned the crime to get money and cars. Instead of walking away with quick cash, he left two people dead and destroyed a family's sense of safety forever. McAlpin was found guilty on all charges, including aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and grand theft. He was sentenced to death.
Therefore, unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed on defendant Joseph McAlpin.
His execution was scheduled for May 19, 2026. However, recently, a court granted him a stay of execution, meaning the sentence will be delayed until all of his appeals and other legal processes are complete. As the family members of the defendant spoke, the defendant began to cry, realizing for the first time what it felt like for the victim's son to lose both parents in the place they had built together as a family. While justice was served in court, the pain of this loss will never fully go away. Our next case takes cruelty to another level. A killer who wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted.
Problem. I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Sean Green.
On September 16, 2016, police in Ashland, Ohio received a chilling emergency call from a woman who whispered that she was being held against her will. That call would uncover the horrifying crimes of Sean Great, a man later revealed to be a serial killer who had secretly terrorized northern Ohio for years. Sean Michael Great was born in 1976 and seemed, at first, like any other kid. He played sports, hung out with his neighbors, and came across as friendly to many. But behind closed doors, his family life was full of pain. His parents divorced when he was very young, and his mother left the family when he was just 11. These early wounds grew into deep anger and dark thoughts. As he grew older, Sean got in trouble with the law, including burglary and assault, but no one imagined the darkness that would follow. From 2006 to 2016, several women disappeared in Ohio. They were mothers, daughters, and friends. For years, their loved ones had no idea what happened to them. Everything changed that day in 2016. The brave woman who called an emergency had been tied up for 3 days, mistreated by Great inside an abandoned house. When police arrived, they rescued her and found the bodies of 2 other missing women hidden in the same house. The investigation grew quickly. Great confessed to killing 5 women. Authorities searched different counties, uncovering more victims, including a young mother named Dana Lowry, whose body had been unidentified for years. Great even led officers to more crime scenes himself. As detectives dug deeper, they learned that Sean had been living a double life. He pretended to be kind and helpful to gain trust, then turned violent. He strangled his victims and sometimes kept their bodies hidden near where he lived. In court documents, prosecutors described his actions as truly depraved and horrifying. During his trial, Great simply stated, "I apologized for my actions," and showed no remorse. In one shocking moment, he even claimed the victims were already gone in their minds because of hardships in their lives. The courtroom was filled with heartbreak as families heard the awful details of how their loved ones were treated. When asked why he committed these terrible acts, Great gave a strange explanation. He said he believed the government had taken over people's minds through assistance programs. He called it their bodies flopping wherever it can flop, showing he had created his twisted reasons to justify hurting innocent women.
No reason for anybody to know exactly who that man is because he's worthless.
In 2018, Sean Great was found guilty of killing Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith. He was sentenced to death for those crimes. However, he remained stone-faced, showing no regret for his actions. Later, he also pleaded guilty to the deaths of Rebecca Lacey, Candace Cunningham, and Dana Lowry. For these, he received multiple life sentences without any chance of parole. His appeals were denied, and the court decided there were no mistakes that could undo his death sentence. Though an execution date was set, ongoing legal processes delayed it further. Families of the victims expressed relief that he would never be free to harm anyone again. Police officers and prosecutors called it one of the most tragic and disturbing investigations they had ever faced. But amid so much darkness, there was also a moment of hope. The woman who bravely escaped and called for help saved her own life and uncovered the truth that had been hidden for so long. Her courage brought justice to families who had waited years for answers. Our next case is pure evil, a killer who hunted across state lines, leaving heartbreak wherever he went.
I was promised on the death penalty that in 7 years, the state of Florida would take care of this.
This is the chilling story of Glenn Edward Rogers, a man known as the cross-country killer. For nearly 3 decades, he drifted across America, blending in as a friendly stranger, while secretly leaving behind a trail of fear and heartbreak. From quiet towns to busy cities, no one knew when or where he would strike next, or who would fall victim to his deadly charm. Glenn's troubles began in early life. He left school before turning 16 and got married young. As the years went on, he faced allegations of mistreatment and became involved in crime. But it was in the 1990s when things turned truly alarming. Authorities started to connect him to the deaths of several women in different states, women who trusted him, only to meet a tragic end. In 1995, a series of suspicious deaths brought Rogers to the attention of law enforcement nationwide. Investigators discovered he had been seen with women shortly before their lives were taken. One of the first clear links was to Sandra Gallagher in California. Sandra's life was cut short, and her vehicle was found burned near Rogers' apartment. From there, investigators tracked him across Mississippi, Florida, and Louisiana, where similar cases emerged. Police collected fingerprints, traced stolen property, and spoke with witnesses who had seen Rogers with the victims. When he was finally stopped in Kentucky after a long highway chase, he was driving a car that belonged to one of the women. His arrest made national headlines, and he was soon named on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. In court, Rogers faced trials in both Florida and California. The evidence against him included witness accounts, forensic proof, and patterns of behavior. He was convicted of killing in the deaths of Sandra Gallagher and Tina Marie Cribbs, and sentenced to death in each state. However, at the time of sentencing, he remained silent, even while in prison. Rogers filed many appeals, claiming mistakes had been made in his trial, but none of them changed the outcome.
He was convicted of murdering 2 women in Florida and California, but he was a suspect in several other murders.
While Rogers never offered a clear reason for his actions, Prosecutors described him as someone who used charm to gain trust, then took advantage of the women he met. Some investigators believed he targeted people for financial gain or out of a desire for control. Rogers once even claimed he committed dozens of killings, though he later said he was only joking. After nearly 3 decades on death row, Glenn Rogers' final appeals were denied. In April 2025, the governor of Florida signed his death warrant. Rogers was executed by lethal injection on May 15, 2025. For numerous families who had lost someone dear, Rogers' execution offered a sense of comfort and finality. Some expressed that they could now find peace, knowing he would no longer pose a threat to anyone. Others believed that his passing was gentler than the suffering he had inflicted. Yet, after so many years of anticipation, the moment had finally come when they could begin to move forward. The next case shows that sometimes the most frightening conflicts occur within the very place that should feel the safest: home.
How did you feel at the time he touched you? I felt like I had to defend myself, whether or not.
On December 20th, 2019, in Jacksonville, Florida, a day that started like any other ended in an unthinkable crime. Marcus Fishburne was staying with his roommate and the roommate's girlfriend, 25-year-old Aisha Levy. No one could imagine how this visit would end. That evening, Levy's boyfriend came home to a terrible scene. The apartment was covered in blood. The silence felt heavy and frightening. On the table, he found a note. Fishburne wrote that he and Levy were both dead and warned that the boyfriend would be next. The police were called right away. As they searched the home, they discovered Levy's body. She had been wrapped carefully and hidden inside a plastic storage bin, tucked away in a closet. It was clear that this was not an accident, but a planned act of cruelty. Detectives worked quickly to track Fishburne down. He was trying to run away on a Greyhound bus, but did not get far. Officers arrested him before he could leave the state. As investigators uncovered more about the case, troubling new details emerged. Fishburne had confronted Levy while she was getting out of the shower. He restrained her so she couldn't defend herself, then carried out a violent attack that tragically ended her life. Although Fishburne never clearly explained why he committed such a cruel act, the threats he left behind in his note showed anger and a desire to harm not only Levy, but also her boyfriend. The case went to court and the jury listened to all the evidence. 10 out of 12 jurors voted to recommend the death penalty. The judge agreed. Marcus Fishburne was officially sentenced to death on June 13, 2024 by a Duval County judge in Florida for killing Aisha Levy.
That the defendant be sentenced to death, and after assessing the proven aggravating factors and all of the mitigating circumstances.
However, he didn't show any guilt for his act. But this was not the end of his harmful actions. In 2022, while in prison, Fishburne attacked his cellmate by cutting his neck with a razor blade attached to a comb. He was given an additional 5 years in prison for that crime. Aisha's family will never be the same after losing her in such a tragic way. The courtroom was filled with sadness, anger, and relief that justice had finally been served. The case stands as a reminder of how quickly trust can be shattered and how important it is to speak up when someone shows sign of dangerous behavior. Our next case is about a drifter who used his charm to deceive, leaving sorrow and loss in every town he passed through.
Where the haystack in this sense is female DNA, and there might be some male DNA, the needles, but you may not be able to see them.
In November 2015, a terrible crime shook a quiet neighborhood in Youngstown, Ohio, leaving everyone in disbelief. A woman named Erica Huff, who used a wheelchair because of multiple sclerosis, lost her life in a brutal attack that shocked the entire community. On the morning of November 5th, Erica was home on Cleveland Street. Her mother was with her, and a visiting nurse came by. Later that day, the nurse left, and not long after, something unthinkable happened. Lance Hundley, a man who knew Erica, attacked her inside her own house. He beat her severely and also assaulted her mother. The conflict was so extreme that the home was set on fire while Erica and her mother were still inside. When emergency crews arrived, the house was in flames. Firefighters and officers rushed in and found Erica's mother unconscious from the beating. Erica herself had already passed away. Hundley was still inside the burning house and refused to come out. Officers pulled him to safety. Detectives began reconstructing the events and soon found traces of gasoline on Hundley's clothing. DNA evidence further linked him to the scene. Investigators concluded that Hundley had waited for the nurse to leave before carrying out the attack, a sign that the act had been carefully planned. In May 2018, after a long trial, a jury heard all the evidence. They listened to Erica's mother, who bravely testified about what she had experienced that day.
I'm on the couch. I couldn't see their face.
Okay.
And they was choking me out from behind.
Hundley tried to say that he had been attacked himself and claimed he woke up to see someone else in the home with a gas can. But the jury did not believe his story. They decided Hundley had planned and carried out this terrible act. Prosecutors argued that Hundley acted with prior calculation and design. The attack was not sudden or accidental. It was deliberate and intended to end Erica's life. Jurors recommended the death penalty. However, he remained emotionless. Judge Maureen Sweeney agreed and sentenced Hundley to death. The Ohio Supreme Court later reviewed the case and upheld the sentence, ruling that there was enough evidence to prove Hundley's guilt. This case left many people heartbroken. Erica Huff was a woman who faced health challenges every day, yet she lived her life with courage. The conflict she suffered was cruel and senseless. While her mother survived, she had to carry the memory of that day forever. The community still remembers Erica, and the ruling brought some measure of justice to her family. Wait to see our next case.
And nothing less.
What he did to my son before murdering him should be done to him. Eye for an eye.
Gut-wrench! In 2003, two young men, Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholz, vanished from Tampa's vibrant community. Their families and friends hoped they would return safely, but those hopes were soon shattered when the truth about their fate was revealed. Jason and Michael were last seen alive in December 2003. Their sudden disappearance alarmed their loved ones, but no one could have imagined the horror they endured. Days later, Michael's body was found in his car in an apartment complex parking lot. Jason, however, was never found. Investigators later learned that he had been dismembered and his remains were discarded in dumpsters, making it impossible to recover his body. As police dug deeper into the case, they uncovered disturbing details. Stephen Lorenzo used dating apps and bars to meet his victims, often targeting those who were trusting and unsuspecting. Investigators found unsettling evidence on his computer, along with items in his home that raised serious concerns. Stephen Lorenzo and his accomplice, Scott Schweikert, had devised a scheme to manipulate and harm their victims. Their actions left a lasting impact on the lives of many and shocked the entire community.
After Mr. Galehouse was killed, his body was wrapped and put on a trailer in the driveway of Mr. Lorenzo's home.
Scott Schweikert, Lorenzo's accomplice, was a middle-aged man from Illinois who shared Lorenzo's sadistic interests. He later cooperated with investigators, providing detailed accounts of how the two planned and carried out their crimes, with Lorenzo taking the lead. Schweikert's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, as he described the horrifying events that had taken place. A survivor, Albert Perkins, testified about his harrowing experience with Lorenzo. He recounted waking up restrained and unable to call for help. Despite the fear he endured, Albert bravely took the stand to share his story, shedding light on Lorenzo's harmful actions. His testimony was instrumental in exposing the extent of Lorenzo's cruelty and bringing the truth to light. For nearly 20 years, the victims' families waited for justice. Then, in December 2022, Stephen Lorenzo finally admitted to his crimes. At his sentencing hearing, he shocked everyone by welcoming the death penalty.
I'm seeking the death penalty. It's in my best interest, basically, because it's a comfort. The sooner I can fetch myself a new body and come back again.
But the judge, Christopher Sabella, made it clear that his decision had nothing to do with Lorenzo's wishes. This is the punishment you deserve for these horrific crimes, he declared. Jason Galehouse's mother, Pam Williams, who was battling terminal cancer, confronted Lorenzo in court with raw emotion. "I'm sick to my stomach just having to look at your disgusting face," she told him. Alongside her was Ruth Wachholz, Michael's mother, who had also waited 2 decades for this moment. On February 24, 2023, Stephen Lorenzo was sentenced to death. The courtroom was filled with emotions, relief, grief, and a sense of long overdue justice. Judge Sabella acknowledged the victims' families' pain, saying, "The thing that was consistent in their testimony is that they have been waiting 20 years for justice. Today, that long wait ends."
Ti condanno a morte. That translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death.
Though nothing can bring back Jason and Michael, their families can finally find some closure, knowing that the men responsible for their suffering will never harm another soul again. Lorenzo's case exposed a predator driven by cruelty. The next case shows that sometimes the most dangerous individuals aren't just killers. They're ideologues willing to take innocent lives for their own twisted beliefs.
After I found out he's getting the death penalty, I went outside and I hugged my friends and I started crying and I was just glad it was over.
On April 13, 2014, a quiet afternoon in Overland Park, Kansas turned into a scene of horror. Frazier Glenn Miller Jr., an 80-year-old man with a long history of controversial beliefs, tragically carried out an attack outside a Jewish community center and a nearby retirement home. His attack left 3 innocent people dead, none of whom were Jewish, despite his hateful intentions. Miller's path to violence started long before that day. Born in 1940, he once served as a U.S. Army veteran, but later in life, he became involved with divisive and controversial organizations. In the 1980s, he established a group called the White Patriot Party, which promoted exclusionary ideas and beliefs. He even sought public office to share his extreme viewpoints. He even ran for public office, hoping to spread his extreme beliefs. However, his activities eventually led to his arrest in 1987, when authorities found a stockpile of illegal weapons and explosives in his possession. He served time in prison, but never let go of his extremist views. By 2014, Miller was in poor health and believed he was dying. Instead of spending his last years peacefully, he planned a deadly attack. On that fateful April day, he drove to the Jewish community center and fired shots at people in the parking lot. He then moved to a nearby retirement home, continuing his rampage. His victims, William Corcoran and his 14-year-old grandson, Reet Underwood, were there for a singing competition. The third victim, Terry Lamano, was visiting her mother. They were Christians, not Jewish, proof that Miller's hatred was as senseless as his crime. After his arrest, Miller showed no guilt and appeared in court in a wheelchair. He shouted hateful slogans and even tried to justify his actions during his trial. The court found him guilty of capital murder and multiple other charges. A Kansas jury sentenced him to death, a punishment he openly accepted, claiming he was proud of what he did and said thank you. Miller remained on death row until May 3, 2021, when he died in prison at the age of 80. Officials stated that his death was due to natural causes. Though his life ended behind bars, the pain he caused to the victims' families remains. The story of Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. is a reminder of the dangers of hate and extremism. Innocent lives were lost because of one man's violent ideology. But in the end, justice prevailed, ensuring that his actions did not go unanswered. Our next case shows that sometimes the motive is even more chilling: senseless cruelty with no reason at all.
His internal life is going to be way worse than whatever he will deal with in this lifetime.
I didn't attend any of the court hearings. I couldn't bear to watch what my grandson endured before he was shot.
On November 11, 2022, 21-year-old Bryce Salter spent his evening at Y Bar and Bistro in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was supposed to be just another night out, but when the evening came to an end, Bryce never made his way home. Hours passed and his family grew concerned. They didn't know that something terrible had happened outside the bar that night. Based on the information the press could gather, authorities were soon involved, and an investigation began into what had taken place. Bryce Salter was a young man full of life, known for his love of sports and fishing. He had a smile that could light up a room, according to his grandmother, Brenda Miles. But in just moments, his life was stolen by Lang, a man who had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. Lang had been out of prison for only a few months when he managed to obtain a stolen gun. On that tragic night, he used it to take Bryce's life. The murder was brutal and completely unprovoked. He tragically shot and killed Salter. Surveillance footage revealed that Lang approached his car, where he encountered Salter. An argument ensued, during which Lang pointed a gun at Salter's chest, knocking him to the ground. Salter attempted to defend himself, but Lang fired multiple shots, resulting in Salter's death. Bryce's father, Brandon Salter, and other family members struggled to comprehend how someone could be so cruel. But what made the case even more disturbing was Lang's behavior during the trial.
Say surveillance video shows the two men arguing when Lang took out a gun and knocked Salter to the ground. Salter fought back, but then Lang shot him.
Lang showed no shame for what he had done. During his sentencing hearing, he laughed as Bryce's family members delivered emotional victim impact statements. He mocked their pain, slumped in his chair, and smirked while Bryce's younger sister, Reese, spoke about how much her brother meant to her. Even after receiving his sentence, a minimum of 100 years in prison, Lang continued to smile. His attitude throughout the trial shocked not only Bryce's family but also the judge, who called Lang's actions senseless, cowardly, and merciless. Despite Lang's disturbing behavior, justice was served. The court handed him a sentence that ensured he would never walk free again. In addition to the 100-year sentence for second-degree murder, Lang received additional time for weapons charges. As the judge announced the verdict, the Salter family clapped with joy as Lang was sentenced.
70 years to a maximum of 100 years. Thank you.
As bailiffs dragged Lang out of the courtroom for his aggressive outbursts, one of Bryce's family members shouted, "How does it feel to know you're going to die in prison?" It was a powerful moment, one that brought a sense of closure to those who had suffered so much. Bryce's father, Brandon, called his son magic and said he had the perfect blend of everything: intelligence, kindness, and charm. His loss left a hole in their hearts that could never be filled. Bryce's sister Reese found the trial to be one of the hardest experiences of her life. Hearing the details of her brother's final moments was devastating, but seeing Lang mock their pain was even worse. In the end, the Salter family found some comfort in knowing that Lang would never harm another person again. While their pain will never fully fade, they could finally say that justice had been served for Bryce. Lang's lack of remorse was gut-wrenching, but what if a killer not only showed no regret but actively mocked the justice system? That's exactly what happened in our next case.
I didn't kill anyone. I'm not spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do.
In 2007, the quiet town of Elyria, Ohio was shattered by a crime that no one saw coming. Dave Kowalczyk, the well-loved owner of Granny D's Pizza, was found murdered, a brutal and calculated act that sent shockwaves through the community. However, the true horror wasn't just in the crime itself, it was in the man behind it. Neil Simpson wasn't just a killer, he was cold, unrepentant, and dangerous. It started when Dave Kowalczyk's body was found in the pizza shop's back room, his hands tied behind his back. Police discovered security footage showing Simpson entering the shop that night. Investigators tracked Simpson to a nearby motel, where he was arrested within 48 hours. As the trial began, his chilling lack of remorse became clear. He didn't just deny his actions, he mocked the very system trying to bring him to justice. Spitting on jurors, hurling profanities, and showing no sign of regret, Simpson proved one thing: he wasn't sorry, and he never would be. From the beginning, the prosecution painted Simpson as a dangerous man. He had a history of trouble, a personality disorder, and a reputation for making reckless decisions. On the night of the murder, he was the leader of the group, the one in control. It was his plan, his decisions, and ultimately his actions that led to Kowalczyk's mourning death. The prosecution argued that the crime was deliberate, not impulsive. Simpson's past made him a threat to society, and they pushed for the death penalty. The defense, however, tried to shift the focus. They claimed his troubled childhood played a role in his actions. They argued that his upbringing shaped him into the man he became, and that should be considered in his sentencing. As the jury delivered their verdict, Simpson's face twisted with rage. Overcome with fury, he did the unthinkable. He spat at the jurors. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as officers swiftly escorted him out. His lawyers, scrambling to salvage the situation, pleaded for a mistrial, but the judge stood firm. 2 hours later, Simpson returned, his demeanor calmer, but his anger still simmering beneath the surface. He turned to the judge and offered an apology, but not to the jury. "I'm not mad at you," he admitted, his voice steady. "I'm mad at them." The courtroom was thick with tension as the jury left to deliberate. When Neil was seeking the death penalty for himself, hours passed, each minute stretching endlessly for Dave Kowalczyk's family. Would they choose the ultimate punishment? Would Neil Simpson be sent to death row for his brutal crime? After 4 agonizing hours, the jury returned. The room fell silent as Judge Mark Betleski prepared to read the verdict. Kowalczyk's family held their breath. Simpson, appearing through a grainy video feed from jail, sat motionless. His freshly shaven head and cold expression betrayed nothing. Then, the words came. Life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Due to election by the state of Ohio, on count 2, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This was justice, but it would never bring Dave back. However, Simpson didn't flinch. No reaction, no shame, just the same blank stare, as if he had already resigned himself to his fate. A life behind bars, with nothing but time to think about the choices that led him there. Though he avoided the death penalty, his defense attorney believed the outcome was worse for him. Life in prison meant no second chances, no hope for freedom. While a death sentence would have given him years of appeals, this verdict left him with only one. His fight for freedom was effectively over. The prosecution stood by the jury's decision, calling it fair and just. The case was closed, and the community could finally move forward. This case is heartbreaking in many ways. A hardworking man lost his life over a senseless crime, leaving his family and loved ones in grief. The trial itself was difficult to watch, especially given Simpson's lack of repentance. While the justice system ensured he would never harm another person again, no sentence could truly make up for the loss of Dave Kowalczyk. His family will carry that pain forever. Neil Simpson may have escaped death row, but he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars, alone, with nothing but time to think about what he's done. The next case reveals how a man who was supposed to save lives turned into a cold-blooded murderer.
Meditated if there are any number of cases in which a defendant was sentenced to death in Nebraska where the prior conduct did not rise to the level of disregard this defendant has for the value of the life of another human being.
Anthony Garcia was once a promising medical student, but his career took a dark turn. Instead of saving lives, he ended up taking them. Between 2008 and 2013, he committed 2 separate double murders in Omaha, Nebraska. His victims were connected to his past failures, and his crimes shocked the community. Garcia had a troubling history in the medical field. After earning his degree, he struggled through multiple residencies, often being forced out due to unprofessional behavior. His time at Creighton University Medical Center was particularly disastrous. His professors found him arrogant and irresponsible, and he was eventually dismissed. Dr. William Hunter and Dr. Roger Brumbach, 2 senior figures at Creighton, played key roles in his termination. Years later, Garcia still held a grudge. Unable to build a successful medical career, he blamed those who had dismissed him. Then, in 2008, an unimaginable tragedy struck. On March 13, 2008, Dr. William Hunter returned home to find a horrifying scene. His 11-year-old son, Thomas Hunter, and the family's housekeeper, Shirley Sherman, had been brutally stabbed to death. The attack shook the community, but investigators struggled to find a suspect. Witnesses had seen a heavy-set man in a silver Honda near the home, but the case quickly went cold. For 5 years, the families had no answers. Then, in 2013, the killer struck again. On May 14, 2013, Dr. Roger and Mary Brumbach were found murdered in their home. Roger had been shot multiple times and stabbed, while Mary had been stabbed to death. Once again, knives from the victim's kitchen had been used. Investigators immediately noticed the similarities to the 2008 murders. Their suspicions grew stronger when they discovered an attempted break-in at the home of Dr. Chanda Butra, another former Creighton professor who had classed with Garcia. It became clear that the killer was targeting former colleagues. Detectives began digging deeper into Garcia's background. They discovered that just before the Brumbach's murders, he had purchased a firearm matching the type used in the crime. His credit card records placed him near the crime scene, and his phone had been used to search for the Brumbach address. On July 15, 2013, authorities arrested Garcia while he was driving in Illinois. He was heavily intoxicated, and inside his car, police found a handgun. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Finally, in the fall of 2016, a trial. After 16 days of testimony, a jury found Garcia guilty of all 4 murders.
Garcia's trial began in October 2016. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including DNA, surveillance footage, and even a chilling confession to an acquaintance where he bragged about killing a young boy and an older woman. Garcia showed little emotion throughout the trial, often wearing headphones and appearing uninterested. After weeks of testimony, the jury found him guilty on all counts. In September 2018, a panel of judges sentenced him to death.
Asleep or catatonic. That's how the attorney for revenge killer Anthony Garcia, eyes closed, hands cuffed. He had no reaction, barely any movement during the testimony.
He remained silent and even slept when the judge announced his death penalty. His crimes had been calculated, brutal, and fueled by revenge. The case of Anthony Garcia is a chilling reminder of how bitterness and resentment can turn deadly. Instead of moving on from his failures, he chose to take innocent lives. His victims were people who had once been part of his world, yet he saw them as obstacles rather than human beings. For the families of Thomas Hunter, Shirley Sherman, Roger Brumbach, and Mary Brumbach, justice was served, but their pain remains. No sentence can bring back their loved ones, but at least the man responsible can never harm anyone again.
What he did is unspeakable. There's no way to take it back. There's no way to fix it.
Barbecue skewers, a duffel bag.
On April 12, 2006, in the quiet town of Purcell, Oklahoma, 10-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin was walking home from school. She lived in an apartment with her father, Curtis Bolin, who worked late hours. That day, Jamie never made it home. Instead, she was lured into the apartment of her neighbor, 26-year-old Kevin Ray Underwood, a man who had been hiding a dark and terrifying secret. Underwood had spent months preparing for something unimaginable. That afternoon, he saw Jamie alone and offered to let her play with his pet rat. Trusting him, she followed him inside. To make her feel comfortable, he turned on SpongeBob SquarePants. However, as she watched TV, he suddenly grabbed a wooden cutting board and struck her on the back of the head. He then suffocated her with his hands until she stopped breathing. Jamie's father grew worried when she didn't return home, and a search party was formed. For 2 days, police and volunteers looked everywhere. Then, on April 14, 2006, investigators knocked on Kevin Underwood's door. What came next revealed the depth of Underwood's depravity. At first, he acted normal, even allowing officers to search his apartment. He later admitted to police that he had long fantasized about torture and death. Underwood had hoped to assault Jamie's body, But when he couldn't, he attempted to decapitate her in the bathtub. When that failed, he wrapped her body in plastic sheeting, placed it inside a storage container, and hid it in his closet. To cover his tracks, he also concealed Jamie's bicycle, making it seem as though she had left the complex on her own. But when officers noticed a large plastic tub sealed with duct tape in his closet, Underwood's composure shattered. He suddenly confessed.
I recognize that I deserve to for what I did.
2 minutes. That's how long convicted killer Kevin Underwood spoke before the State Pardon and Parole Board.
Inside, authorities discovered various kitchen tools that he had planned to use for his disturbing and horrific intentions. Underwood later admitted that he had shocking plans involving Jamie's remains, revealing a deeply troubling mindset. His trial was swift. On February 29, 2008, a jury took just 23 minutes to find him guilty of first-degree murder. A week later, they recommended the death penalty, which was officially handed down on April 3, 2008. Underwood tried to appeal, arguing that his mental illness made him unfit for execution, but his pleas were rejected. Before his execution, his witness repeated his last words. "I'd like to apologize for the terrible things I did. I hate that. I did those things and I wish I could take them back." Finally, after years on death row, his execution date was set for December 19, 2024, his 45th birthday. On the morning of his execution, Underwood was served his last meal: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, a cheeseburger, and a cola drink. As he lay on the execution table, he made his final statement. "The decision to execute me on my birthday and 6 days before Christmas was a needlessly cruel thing to do to my family, but I'm very sorry for what I did, and I wish I could take it back." At 10:14 a.m., Underwood was pronounced dead by lethal injection. Witnesses reported that he cried silently in his final moments. Jamie Rolls Boland was an innocent child with a bright future. Her life was stolen by a man whose twisted desires turned into real-life horror. While Underwood's execution brought a sense of justice, it could never undo the pain Jamie's family endured.
You not only took her life, but you ended ours as well. You, Kevin Underwood, single-handedly changed our family forever.
The next case pulls us further into the mind of a killer, a young man whose thirst for violence didn't stop with just one victim.
The death penalty should be banned for those charged with crimes committed while they were under the age of 21.
On November 1, 1997, in Greenville County, South Carolina, 19-year-old Freddie Eugene Owens and his friends set out with one goal: armed robbery. What should have been a quick crime for money turned into a brutal murder. Freddie Owens and his accomplice, 18-year-old Stephen Andra Golden, stormed into a convenience store late that night. Inside, they found 41-year-old Irene Granger Graves, a hardworking single mother of 3. She was just trying to get through her shift when her life was suddenly in danger. Owens, wearing a ski mask, demanded she open the store's safe. But when Irene couldn't do it, Owens didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, shooting her in the head. He and Golden grabbed just $37.29 from the register and ran. Outside, their 2 other friends, Lester Young and Nikeo Vance, were waiting. Owens casually told them, "I shot her." It didn't take long for authorities to catch up. 10 days later, Owens and Golden were arrested and charged with murder. Golden took a plea deal, testifying against Owens in exchange for a lesser sentence: 28 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. Owens, however, denied everything. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed 2 masked men entering the store. The man in the ski mask, Owens, was seen pulling the trigger. On February 15, 1999, a jury found Owens guilty of murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. His sentencing was scheduled for 2 days later. But before he could even be sentenced, Owens committed another horrifying act. Less than 12 hours after his conviction, Owens, now awaiting sentencing in jail, killed another man, 28-year-old Christopher Brian Lee. Lee had been jailed for a traffic offense, but that night he made a fatal mistake. He taunted Owens about his conviction, claiming his cousin was one of the jurors. Enraged, Owens attacked him in their shared cell. He attacked Lee, injuring him with a pen and a bedsheet. As if that wasn't enough, Owens then harmed him further with a lighter before blocking his airway with a pen. With 2 murders under his belt, the jury had no sympathy. On February 17, 1999, Owens was sentenced to death. But instead of pleading for mercy, he showed no remorse. Over the years, his case was repeatedly overturned on technical grounds, leading to multiple resentencing trials. But each time, the verdict remained the same: death. While on death row, Owens converted to Islam and took the name Khalil Divine Black Son Allah. He spent his time studying history, writing poetry, and even learning Arabic. After exhausting all appeals, Owens was finally scheduled for execution on September 20th, 2024, making him the first person executed in South Carolina in 13 years. Initially, he refused to choose his method of execution, saying that selecting a method would be a form of suicide, which his religion forbade. Eventually, his lawyer decided for him: lethal injection. For his final meal, Owens ordered 2 cheeseburgers, some French fries, a well-done ribeye steak, 6 chicken wings, 2 strawberry sodas, and a slice of apple pie. When the curtain to the death chamber opened, Owens was strapped to a gurney with his arms extended. He mouthed the word "bye" to his attorney before the lethal injection was administered. Approximately 1 minute after the injection, his eyes closed and he took several deep breaths. His breathing became shallower and his face twitched for about 4 to 5 minutes before all movement ceased. On the day of his execution, the family of Irene Graves and Christopher Lee gathered to witness justice being served. They had waited decades for this moment. At 6:17 p.m., Freddie Eugene Owens was pronounced dead. The murders of Irene Graves and Christopher Lee left families shattered. Irene's children lost their mother. Christopher's family never got to say goodbye. Our next case is even more horrifying. A man walked into a bank and murdered 5 women.
He just, for some reason, always hated people and wanted everybody to die. And he's been threatening this for so long. And he's been having dreams about it and everything.
On January 23, 2019, Sebring, Florida woke up to what seemed like just another ordinary day. The SunTrust Bank was open for business, with employees helping customers as usual. No one inside knew that their lives were about to change forever. Around noon, a man walked into the bank. His name was Zephan Zaver, a 21-year-old former prison guard trainee. He wasn't there to make a transaction. He was there to kill. Without warning, Zaver pulled out a gun and ordered everyone to the ground. 5 women inside: Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Anna Panan Williams, Deborah Cook, and Jessica Montague, had no time to react. Zaver made them kneel in a line before opening fire. There was no robbery, no demand for money, just cold-blooded murder. After the shooting, Zaver called 911 himself and calmly told the dispatcher, "I have shot 5 people." Zaver's background revealed troubling signs. As a teenager, he had violent thoughts and talked about harming others. In high school, he told classmates he had dreams about killing people. His school principal even contacted the police, but nothing was done. Later, Zaver joined the army, but he was discharged after 3 months. A former girlfriend, whom he met in a mental hospital, once said he believed the military was a way to kill people and get away with it. Despite these red flags, Florida police hired him as a prison guard trainee in 2018. He quit 2 months later, just 2 weeks before the shootings. Zaver was arrested at the scene and later pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, his defense argued that his mental illness and troubled past should be considered, but the jury saw through it. In June 2024, a jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty. Judge Angela Coden agreed. She called his actions calculated, heinous, cruel, and sentenced him to death. However, he remained stone-faced even after hearing his death penalty.
The defendant was previously adjudicated guilty of count 5 for the crime of the first-degree murder of Cynthia Watson. This court sentences the defendant to death.
Before sentencing him to death, she looked him in the eye and said, "May God have mercy on your soul." Zephan Zaver never denied his actions. He wanted to kill, and he did. Now he'll spend the rest of his days awaiting execution until the government sets a date, a fate that still feels too merciful for the horror he inflicted upon 5 innocent lives. The families of the victims were devastated. Marisol Lopez's son spoke in court saying, "You shattered me into a million pieces." Blackman, the family member of one of the families, had no sympathy for Zaver and stares at him angrily.
On the stand, Blackman continuing to stare at Zaver, visibly emotional, shaking his head until the judge stopped the trial, removed the jury, and reprimanded the witness.
The case shook Sebring, a small town of just 11,000 people. Many still struggle to understand how someone with such a disturbing history was allowed to walk free.
Yeah, he works, he has his car. I mean, he was just a functioning 21-year-old. I mean, to my knowledge, anytime I'd ever seen him, he's just quiet.
Our next case exposes how one fateful decision changed history forever.
He truly wants the finality of this tonight. They want closure, they want it over. This was a horrific event that affected not just the family, but our entire community.
On March 28, 1996, Donovan Corey Parks, a hardworking corrections officer, was just going about his day in Milledgeville, Georgia. He had no idea that a simple act of kindness would lead to his tragic death. That day, he ran into Robert Earl Butts Jr., a former coworker from Burger King, outside a Walmart. Butts asked Parks for a ride, and since they knew each other, Parks agreed. Butts got into the front seat, while his friend Marion Wilson Jr. sat in the back. Everything seemed normal as they drove away. Parks had no idea he was in danger. At some point during the ride, Butts and Wilson forced him to pull over. They ordered him out of the car, and as he lay on the ground, shot him in the back of the head with a sawed-off shotgun. His lifeless body was left face down on a residential street. Meanwhile, the two killers took his car and drove off. When they failed to find a buyer, they decided to burn it and destroy the evidence.
Members of the Folk Nation gang, and we're talking to the prosecutors about that. This adds a more severe penalty to any offense.
For 4 days, investigators worked to track down the killers. When Butts and Wilson were finally arrested, they both blamed each other for pulling the trigger. However, authorities discovered that both men were members of the Folk Nation street gang. Prosecutors believed that the murder was a gang initiation, killing an innocent man just to gain status. Both Butts and Wilson were charged with murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and in 1997, Wilson was sentenced to death. However, he showed no emotion, neither for his actions nor for his sentence. A year later, Butts received the same sentence. For years, they fought to overturn their convictions, filing multiple appeals, including one to the U.S. Supreme Court. But each time, the courts rejected their claims, ruling that their trials had been fair.
The parolee board has issued a stay for an inmate who was scheduled to be executed today. Robert Earl Butts Jr. was scheduled to die tonight at the state prison in Jackson.
One of his family members said, he loves his family, and the death penalty is not the answer.
He is so very sorry, so please know that, and how much he loves his family. And, this death penalty is no way to solve that.
Justice was finally served in 2018. On May 4th, at the time of his execution, Butts requested a hamburger with bacon and 2 kinds of cheese, a ribeye steak, chicken tenders, seasoned french fries, cheesecake, and strawberry lemonade to drink. Robert Earl Butts Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison. When asked for his final words, Butts said, "I've been drinking caffeine all day." It was a strange statement, making us wonder if he hoped the caffeine might counteract the effects of the lethal injection that would soon put him to sleep forever. As the procedure started, he muttered, "It burns, man." A year later, on June 20th, 2019, Marion Wilson Jr. was also executed. His execution made history. He became the 1,500th person to be put to death in the U.S. since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. At the time of his execution, Wilson is served with 1 medium thin crust pizza with all the toppings, 20 buffalo wings with spicy sauce, 1 pint of butter pecan ice cream, apple pie, and grape juice. After his meal, Wilson recorded a final statement at 5 p.m. He accepted a sedative at 6 p.m. Before the lethal injection was administered, Wilson was allowed to make a final statement. He declared, "I ain't never taken a life in my life." Addressing his loved ones, he said, "I love y'all forever. Death can't stop it. Can't nothing stop it." He also accepted a final prayer. Wilson was pronounced dead at 9:52 p.m. His daughter, born after his arrest, says, her dad is a kind-hearted and gentle person. He has always been a type of daddy who just wants the best for his family and his child.
My daddy, Marion Wilson, was a very kind-hearted, gentle person. He's always been the type of daddy who just wants the best for his family, his child, and the best for himself.
Parks' family attended both executions, but they knew that no punishment could bring him back. His brother later shared the pain of their loss. Execution doesn't bring him back, but it offers a starting point for healing. In memory of his brother, he named his daughter Corey, ensuring that Donovan Corey Parks' name would never be forgotten. Our next case takes us to a killer whose motivation wasn't loyalty or reputation. It was pure evil.
The statement that I had delivered to you already about my brother Donnie and the innocent men on Nebraska's death row.
On August 14, 2018, Nebraska carried out its first execution in over 2 decades. The man at the center of this case was Kerry Dean Moore, a convicted murderer who had spent nearly 40 years on death row. His execution would spark controversy, not just because of the crime he committed, but also due to the legal battle that unfolded over the substance used to end his life. It all started in the summer of 1979. Moore, a 21-year-old man from Omaha, Nebraska, made a choice that would alter his life forever. He robbed and murdered 2 cab drivers in cold blood. After the crimes, he was arrested and later confessed to the killings. The evidence was overwhelming, and in 1980, a panel of 3 judges sentenced him to death.
Saying he shot both cab drivers because he didn't want to be identified after he robbed them. And Moore said he kept the murder weapon because it gave him a feeling of power.
Moore's execution was delayed for nearly 4 decades due to legal appeals and Nebraska's changing stance on the death penalty. But in 2018, after years of legal battles, the state decided it was time to enforce the sentence. This marked the first time a new method had ever been used in a legal procedure of this kind. On the morning of August 14, 2018, Carrie Dean Moore was led to the execution chamber at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. In the hours leading up to his execution, Moore shared a meal with his family and friends, including his brother, David Moore. They were allowed to share Pizza Hut pizza, Pepsi, and strawberry cheesecake. This meal was shared with loved ones, including prison guards. Witnesses reported that Moore appeared composed yet shaken before the execution. He mouthed the words, "I love you," to his supporters before the lethal injection was administered. The first of 4 substances was administered at 10:24 a.m., and Moore was pronounced dead at 10:47 a.m. It was Nebraska's first execution since 1997, and the first in the state's history to be carried out using lethal injection.
The Lancaster County coroner produced Moore's time of death at 10:47 a.m. As the director of the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, I am required to carry out the order of the court.
After the execution, Nebraska prison officials admitted they might never be able to obtain those substances again. Many pharmacies had refused to sell execution substances to prisons, making lethal injections harder to carry out in the future. People had mixed reactions. Some believed justice had been served. Moore had confessed to the crimes, and he had been sentenced according to the law. Others saw the execution as a violation of human rights, arguing that Nebraska had gone to extreme lengths to carry it out, despite the controversy. But the victim's mother was happy. She said that God had answered my prayers.
I really do. My prayers have been answered. And I prayed all along that they would catch him, and God answered my prayers.
Up next, Peter Avsonu, a cold-blooded killer whose crimes left a trail of devastation. His case exposed a shocking lack of remorse and a chilling willingness to take lives without hesitation.
Now on 7 News at 5:30, police working a double murder mystery after a family member expected home for the holidays never shows up.
We have 2 men who were murdered in this Wilton Manors home. Now, detectives won't tell us very much more than that. They won't say who they are or how they were murdered.
On a quiet December morning in 2010, a disturbing discovery sent shockwaves through the serene town of Wilton Manors, Florida. Inside a meticulously maintained home, the bodies of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, a beloved couple, were found in what police described as an execution-style killing. The crime was as brutal as it was senseless, leaving a once vibrant community in fear. Behind this horrific act was Peter Avsonu, a man with a troubled past and a chilling lack of remorse. But the full story of what unfolded and how Avsonu reacted in the courtroom made this case one of the most disturbing the state had ever seen. Peter Avsonu was no stranger to the criminal justice system. His life had been marked by a series of arrests for fraud, theft, and adult services. By the time he crossed paths with Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, Avsonu had already developed a reputation as a dangerous drifter.
Their brother, Stephen Adams, and his partner, Kevin Powell, were found shot to death in their Wilton Manors home over Christmas 2010.
Adams and Powell, known for their kindness and generosity, had offered Avsonu a place to stay after meeting him online. But what began as an act of goodwill ended in betrayal. On December 23, 2010, Avsonu shot both men execution-style in their home, stealing their car, cash, and valuables before fleeing.
But we do know that the bodies were discovered here yesterday.
Investigators were horrified by the details of the crime scene. Evidence suggested the killings were calculated and cold-blooded, with no signs of a struggle. It was as if Avsonu had meticulously planned every step. Avsonu's escape was short-lived. Days after the murders, he was pulled over in South Florida, driving the victim's car. Inside, police found several of the couple's belongings, along with a journal detailing his thoughts, which prosecutors later used to show his twisted mindset. During his trial, the case against Avsonu was airtight. Ballistics linked the murder weapon to the crime scene, and surveillance footage placed him at the victim's home shortly before their deaths. The most damning evidence, however, came from his own words. Avsonu showed no remorse for the murders, claiming they were justified by his hatred for same-sex couples.
Read a short statement to the jury before they deliberated.
I have no regrets in my life and am proud of every decision I've ever made. Nobody here knows what really happened that day.
In 2018, after years of legal proceedings, Peter Avsonu was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His trial became infamous not just for the horrific details of his crimes, but for his behavior in the courtroom.
Peter Avsonu was sentenced to death for murdering Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell. He made an obscene gesture at the family of Adams.
When the verdict was read, Avsonu's reaction shocked everyone. He smirked at the victims' families and raised his middle finger, a final act of defiance that underscored his complete lack of remorse. His actions left the courtroom stunned and further cemented his place as one of Florida's most despicable killers.
After what happened in that courtroom just now, I'm happy that he's put to the death penalty.
The families of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell were left grappling with their grief and anger. The couple had been pillars of their community, loved for their generosity and compassion. To see Avsonu treat their deaths with such contempt during his trial was almost too much to bear. For the jurors and spectators, Avsonu's chilling reaction during sentencing was a stark reminder of his callous nature. Even in the face of death, he seemed to relish the chaos and pain he had caused. His smirk, combined with his unapologetic demeanor, made it clear that he had no regrets. The case also sparked conversations about hate crimes and the dangers of misplaced trust. Adams and Powell had opened their home to someone they believed needed help, only to become victims of his twisted agenda. Peter Avsonu's behavior was a cruel slap in the face to the grieving families of his victims. But the next case of Sean Finnegan takes an even darker turn of calculated cruelty.
Investigators discovering the body of Jennifer Paxton at a home on East Fairview Road. Now, documents say the victim was tortured and deprived of medical care.
In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the murder of Jennifer Gail Paxton shocked the community to its core. Jennifer was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, but her life was cut tragically short in a way that defied comprehension.
He's just, those eyes, just like a wild animal.
The man responsible was Sean Finnegan, a figure whose disturbing actions would paint him as one of the most cruel and callous killers in the state's history. But it wasn't just his crimes that left people horrified. It was his behavior in court that made him unforgettable.
In 2020, police in Oak Ridge, Tennessee investigate a tip that Sean Finnegan and his girlfriend Rebecca Dishman have a human body stored in their freezer.
Sean Finnegan's life was a pattern of manipulation and control, culminating in the events that would make him infamous. In December 2020, Finnegan lured Jennifer Paxton to his home under the guise of offering her a place to stay. She had been struggling with homelessness and believed this was a chance to rebuild her life. But once inside, Finnegan's demeanor shifted from kind to sinister. He held her captive for weeks, subjecting her to physical and emotional harm. Witnesses and investigators later pieced together a timeline that revealed a horrifying pattern of torture and dehumanization. The tragedy reached its peak when Finnegan decided Jennifer was no longer useful to him. He bound her with zip ties, brutally beat her, and ultimately strangled her to death. As if the murder wasn't heinous enough, Finnegan desecrated her body before storing it in a freezer, an act that underscored his complete lack of empathy. The discovery of Jennifer's body came weeks later when a tip led police to Finnegan's home. Inside, investigators were met with a gruesome scene, her body stuffed into a freezer, evidence of her brutal final moments etched into every corner of the room. Finnegan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from forensic analysis to the testimonies of those who had seen Jennifer in the days before her disappearance. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution revealed chilling details of Finnegan's crimes. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder, it was the calculated and methodical way he carried it out. His lack of remorse was palpable, creating an atmosphere of unease in the courtroom.
You can see Finnegan fidgeting as the Emmy shows the mannequin. Now, several members of the jury looked away while the autopsy photos were being shown.
In August 2024, after a harrowing trial, Sean Finnegan was convicted of all charges and sentenced to death. The jury's decision was swift, reflecting the sheer horror of the evidence presented.
Upon the verdict, the jury find you, Sean Finnegan, to be guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. Upon further verdict of fixing the punishment of death, it is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by lethal injection.
But Finnegan's reaction to the verdict was what truly captured headlines. As the death sentence was read aloud, Finnegan's expression remained eerily blank, a chilling contrast to the emotional testimonies of Jennifer's family. His lack of reaction was described as unnerving, as though the gravity of his crimes and his punishment hadn't registered at all. Jennifer Paxton's family sat through the trial, their grief on full display as they listened to the gruesome details of her final moments. For them, justice was bittersweet. While the death sentence brought some closure, it could never replace the vibrant life that had been taken so senselessly.
Jennifer, she just needs justice.
The courtroom was heavy with emotion during the sentencing, with jurors visibly shaken by the evidence they had reviewed. For those who knew Jennifer, Finnegan's stoic demeanor only added to the pain, a stark reminder of the inhumanity behind his actions. As news of the case spread, it sparked conversations about the vulnerability of those experiencing homelessness and the dangers they often face. Jennifer's story became a tragic symbol of how trust can be manipulated by those with the darkest intentions. Sean Finnegan's chilling lack of remorse revealed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case uncovers a predator who lurked in plain sight: Michael Gargiulo, the Hollywood Ripper.
The Hollywood Ripper. He's been called a serial thrill killer.
To his neighbors, Michael Gargiulo seemed like the perfect gentleman, a friendly face with an easy smile. But behind his charming exterior lurked a predator so calculating and cold, his crimes would horrify the nation. Nicknamed the Hollywood Ripper, Gargiulo targeted young women in the Los Angeles area. His attacks were brutal, methodical, and deeply personal. But what made his story even more chilling was how long he evaded justice, hiding in plain sight as he claimed victim after victim.
Trisha Pacaccio was 18 when she was stabbed 12 times right outside her home after a night out with friends.
Gargiulo's reign of terror began in the early 1990s when his neighbor, Trisha Pacaccio, was found stabbed to death outside her home in Illinois. Authorities couldn't connect him to the crime at the time, and Gargiulo relocated to California, a move that would prove deadly for 2 more women. In 2001, Ashley Ellerin, a fashion student, was found murdered in her Hollywood Hills home. She had been stabbed 47 times in a ferocious attack that shocked even the most experienced detectives. What made this case infamous was that Ellerin had been scheduled to go on a date with actor Ashton Kutcher the same night she was killed. Kutcher, who arrived late to pick her up, testified that he saw what he thought were red wine stains through the window, a gruesome detail that later revealed the horror inside. The killings didn't stop there. In 2005, another young woman, Maria Bruno, was found murdered in her El Monte apartment. Like Ellerin, Bruno's death was brutal and ritualistic. Gargiulo meticulously planned his attacks, breaking into homes and catching his victims completely off guard. Gargiulo's obsession with control and violence made him a shadowy predator, operating under the radar while authorities struggled to piece together the pattern of his crimes. The break in the case came in 2008, when Gargiulo targeted his final victim, Michelle Murphy. Unlike his previous attacks, this time his prey fought back. Murphy, a young woman in her 20s, managed to fend off Gargiulo during a vicious assault in her Santa Monica apartment. She survived, becoming the first person to live through one of his attacks. Murphy's bravery not only saved her life, but also led to Gargiulo's downfall. Investigators found blood at the scene, linking Gargiulo to the crime through DNA evidence. That same DNA connected him to the murders of Ellerin and Bruno, as well as Pacaccio years earlier in Illinois. The pieces finally fell into place, and the Hollywood Ripper was taken into custody. Michael Gargiulo's trial captivated the nation, with Ashton Kutcher among the witnesses testifying against him. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who stalked his victims, broke into their homes, and carried out his crimes with cold precision. In 2019, after a lengthy trial, Gargiulo was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. During the sentencing phase, the courtroom was tense as victims' families recounted the grief and anger. Gargiulo, however, remained stoic and emotionless, refusing to acknowledge the pain he had caused. His demeanor throughout the trial was unnerving, as though he felt no connection to the lives he had destroyed. The jury recommended the death penalty, and in 2021, Gargiulo was officially sentenced to death. His case remains infamous, not only for the gruesome details of his crimes, but also for his lack of remorse.
I haven't spoken about the impact that Ashley's murder has had on me. I know that losing her has adjusted my acceptance of my own mortality.
The families of Gargiulo's victims described the pain of facing him in court, knowing he showed no regret for his actions. Ashton Kutcher, speaking about his brief connection to Ashley Ellerin, recalled the guilt he felt for not realizing something was wrong that night. For Michelle Murphy, the only known survivor, the trial was a chance to confront the man who nearly killed her. Her testimony was powerful and emotional, a reminder of the lives Gargiulo could have claimed if not for her resilience.
To bring a child into this world and to experience that joy. All I can do is think about the parents.
The courtroom was filled with a mix of grief, anger, and relief when the death sentence was handed down. But for those who knew his victims, no punishment could truly erase the scars left by the Hollywood Ripper.
Michael Gargiulo's lack of remorse left the courtroom stunned, but the next case reveals a killer who smiled through his death sentence, sending chills through everyone in the room.
This is the most horrific crime that I had ever seen.
The case that cannot be forgotten.
Oh, God.
Can only someone truly insane have committed these acts?
In the summer of 2014, what appeared to be the life of a successful software engineer in Lexington County, South Carolina, concealed an unspeakable darkness. Timothy Jones Jr., a father of 5, was living a double life. A man respected at work, but consumed by personal demons at home. What authorities would uncover about Jones's actions defied belief. His crime wasn't just horrifying in its brutality. It was the deliberate and calculated destruction of his own family.
Jones and the kid's mother, Amber Kaiser, had divorced after a rocky marriage. As part of their separation, Jones received custody.
Timothy Jones Jr. had been battling personal struggles for years. A devout but a controlling man, he imposed harsh rules on his children and struggled to manage his temper. When his marriage to Amber Kaiser fell apart in 2012, custody of their 5 children was granted to Jones, a decision that would prove fatal.
I just PT'd his ass till he couldn't handle it.
And when you're saying PT, and what are we talking about?
Squats.
How long were you having him PT?
PT like an hour.
In August 2014, Jones became convinced that his 6-year-old son, Natan, had broken an electrical outlet in their home. Enraged, Jones forced the boy to perform grueling exercises as punishment, pushing him far beyond his physical limits. Natan collapsed and died. Panicked and spiraling, Jones made a chilling decision: to kill his remaining children to cover up the first murder. One by one, he strangled his 7-year-old daughter, 8-year-old son, and 2-year-old twin boys with his bare hands. He then loaded their lifeless bodies into his SUV and drove aimlessly across state lines for days, unsure of what to do next.
Tim, I'm not calling to argue or anything. I just, like, the past 2 or 3 phone calls, you've been, like, really on edge.
The sheer coldness of his actions and the methodical way he carried out the murders left investigators stunned when they pieced together the timeline.
Jones is stopped at a checkpoint in Mississippi, but there's no sign of the children.
Jones's attempt to flee was prevented when he was pulled over at a traffic stop in Mississippi. The officer, noting a foul odor emanating from his SUV, became suspicious and questioned Jones. After a brief search, the officer discovered the children's bodies in garbage bags in the vehicle's trunk. Jones was immediately arrested, and the horrific truth of what had happened to his children began to unravel. During his trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Jones's meticulous planning and lack of remorse. He had disposed of his children as if they were trash, driving across multiple states with their bodies in tow.
Who do you remember using the belt on? Were they older? Did they put up a fight?
I mean, what person's not?
The courtroom was riveted as the details of Jones's crimes were laid bare, painting the picture of a man who saw his children not as human beings, but as obstacles to his freedom. In June 2019, Timothy Jones Jr. was found guilty of 5 counts of murder. During the sentencing phase, the defense argued that Jones suffered from mental illness and emotional instability, hoping to spare him the death penalty.
And the murder of 5 children 11 years of age or younger. Now recommend to the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones Jr., be sentenced to death.
But the jury wasn't swayed. After hearing the graphic details of the murders and the devastating impact on the family, they unanimously sentenced Jones to death. The judge described Jones's actions as the ultimate betrayal, a father turning against the very children he was meant to protect. Jones sat stone-faced during the sentencing, showing no visible emotion as the decision was read. The courtroom during Timothy Jones Jr.'s trial was a mix of raw emotion and disbelief. Family members, including Amber Kaiser, the children's mother, expressed their grief and anger in heartbreaking testimonies. Kaiser sobbed as she described her love for her children and her regret for trusting Jones to care for them. For the jurors, the case left a lasting mark. Some later admitted they were haunted by the images of the children and the cold, methodical way Jones carried out their murders. Jones's lack of reaction during the sentencing only deepened the pain for those in the courtroom. It was as if he had emotionally disconnected from the weight of his crimes, leaving victims' families struggling to find closure. This case became a chilling reminder of how a person can appear composed on the surface while hiding unimaginable cruelty beneath. Timothy Jones Jr.'s lack of emotion during his trial showed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case takes us to Alfred Bourgeois, whose heartless crimes and chilling courtroom behavior left everyone speechless.
Home, a child killer who has spent 15 years on federal death row faces execution next month.
In December 2002, Alfred Bourgeois' actions shocked the quiet community of Corpus Christi, Texas. A long-haul truck driver with a volatile temper, Bourgeois was arrested for a crime so horrific that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The victim? His 2-year-old daughter, who was entrusted to his care during a temporary custody arrangement. But instead of love and protection, she endured weeks of unimaginable harm at his hands, culminating in her tragic death. Alfred Bourgeois' life on the road often blurred the line between work and family. But beneath the surface, his temper and desire for control made him a dangerous figure, especially to those closest to him. In the weeks leading up to his daughter's death, Bourgeois subjected her to relentless physical and emotional torment. Witnesses later described seeing the child bruised, her tiny frame evidence of the systemic harm she endured. He would force her to sleep in the cab of his truck and withheld basic necessities as punishment for minor mistakes. The breaking point came during a routine stop at a naval base in Corpus Christi. Enraged after the toddler accidentally spilled her potty training seat in his truck, Bourgeois reacted with uncontrolled fury. He grabbed her and violently slammed her head into the dashboard, an act so brutal that it caused catastrophic injuries. When paramedics arrived, they found the child unresponsive. Despite their efforts, it was too late. Her small body bore the marks of a long history of harm, including fractures, scars, and internal injuries. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of what she had endured in her short life. The investigation into Bourgeois' crimes was swift and damning. Medical examiners confirmed that the fatal injuries could only have been caused by deliberate violence. Witness testimonies and forensic evidence left no room for doubt about who was responsible. During the trial, Bourgeois' attempts to defend himself fell flat. He claimed that death was accidental, but the prosecution tore his narrative apart, revealing his pattern of cruelty and neglect. Jurors listened in horror as the evidence mounted, showing that this was not a one-time incident, but the culmination of weeks of calculated harm. It didn't take long for the jury to deliver their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. The sentencing was equally decisive. Bourgeois was sentenced to death. Alfred Bourgeois' crimes left an indelible mark not just on his victim's family, but on everyone who followed the case. In December 2020, nearly 2 decades after his conviction, Bourgeois was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. His final moments were as chilling as the crimes he committed. Witnesses described him as defiant to the end, maintaining his innocence and showing no signs of remorse. It was this cold indifference that haunted those in the room, a final reminder of the man who had so brutally betrayed the trust placed in him. The execution marked the 10th carried out by the federal government that year, part of a controversial wave of federal executions. For the family of the young victim, the execution brought a bittersweet sense of justice. It closed one chapter of their grief, but could never undo the damage Bourgeois had caused. The courtroom during Bourgeois' trial was a scene of heartbreak and anger. As prosecutors detailed the horrific harm, jurors and onlookers struggled to process the depths of his cruelty. Many found it hard to understand how someone could inflict such pain on their own child. Perhaps most unsettling was Bourgeois' demeanor throughout the trial. He sat stone-faced as medical examiners described the injuries his daughter suffered. His refusal to take responsibility, right up to his final breath, left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed the proceedings. For the paramedics and doctors who tried to save the young girl, the case was a grim reminder of the worst they could face in their line of work. For advocates against child mistreatment, it became a rallying cry to ensure such tragedies were never ignored.
The next case shows how personal grudges can turn lethal. Devin Schreiner waited for her moment and executed the man she once loved.
We have witnesses and we have surveillance footage.
Right, and
we always.
I said to the detective, I don't have an answer for that.
You don't have an answer. You have like zero answer. How do you think something like that could happen?
On a quiet afternoon on October 13th, 2021, the peaceful town of Longmont, Colorado, carried on with its usual rhythm. Children rode their bikes through calm streets, neighbors exchanged friendly waves, and everything seemed ordinary. But that calm was suddenly broken. A U.S. Postal Service worker, 33-year-old Jason Schaefer, was shot and killed while delivering mail. The person behind the trigger was his ex-girlfriend and the mother of his child. Jason and 27-year-old Devin Schreiner had once been in love. They shared a child and had built a life together, but over time, their relationship turned bitter. They became locked in a custody battle. Just 2 days before his murder, Jason had filed paperwork asking for primary custody of their 5-year-old child. That decision may have sealed his fate. Witnesses were stunned. A mailman was shot in broad daylight. Investigators acted quickly. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service worked closely with the Longmont police to determine who was responsible for the crime. Before long, all evidence pointed to Devin Schreiner. She had both the motive and the opportunity. Surveillance footage and phone records placed her near the scene. Within hours, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. But the case grew deeper. Authorities believed she had help. Another man named Andrew James Ritchie was accused of helping plan the murder. Prosecutors said he followed Jason during his mail route and gave Devin real-time updates, helping her set up the deadly ambush. After months of investigation and legal proceedings, Devin's trial finally began. The courtroom was quiet as prosecutors presented their case. They described a mother so desperate not to lose custody that she made a tragic decision. The jury took just 8 hours to reach a verdict. Devin Schreiner was found guilty of first-degree murder. At the center of it all was their child. Jason simply wanted more time with his son. He believed he could provide a better and more stable life, but Devin saw that as a threat. Instead of fighting in court, she chose to take his life. The judge delivered the sentence without delay. Devin Schreiner, sentenced to life in prison without the eligibility of parole. Yet, she showed no emotion for her actions. It was the mandatory punishment under Colorado law for first-degree murder. Meanwhile, Andrew Ritchie was accused of playing a key role in planning Jason's murder. He was later sentenced to life in prison without the eligibility of parole. The entire community was shaken. A federal worker had been killed while simply doing his job. For Jason's family and friends, the loss was unbearable. He was a father, a kind soul, and a man who only wanted to be present in his child's life. Justice may have been served, but no sentence can ever bring him back. Our next case is even more chaotic, where betrayal collided on a holiday no one would forget.
Everything was a mistake. It was an accident that happened.
Labor Day 2018 began like any other, a calm afternoon that gave no warning of the storm ahead. But by the end of the day, Norman Sullivan was dead, brutally shot in the head and neck, and the peaceful holiday had become a crime scene. And at the center of it all stood one name, a woman no one suspected until the truth slowly began to unravel. Initially, the details were unclear. Police responded to reports of a disturbance, and it quickly became evident that Norman Sullivan had been killed. But the question remained about who pulled the trigger. Witnesses remained quiet. The scene was chaotic. But one name kept surfacing during the investigation, and that was Aisha Jones. Investigators began piecing together what had happened. They discovered that Aisha Jones and her husband, Dominic Gillespie, knew Sullivan personally. The three individuals had reportedly been connected through substance-related interactions. Authorities discovered that on that Labor Day, the couple visited Sullivan's home to make a questionable exchange that would later have serious consequences. According to Sergeant Victor Miller of the Chattanooga Police Department, Aisha had mentioned something about a plasma card during the visit. The question was whether she went there with any intention of committing a crime or causing harm. When asked, Sergeant Miller clearly stated that there was no indication Aisha had planned to rob or kill Sullivan. Still, something went wrong. Witnesses said a fight broke out behind closed doors between Sullivan and Gillespie. The struggle spilled into the bedroom where Aisha was present, and during the chaos, a gun was fired. Norman Sullivan was struck in the head and neck. No weapon was ever recovered from the scene. However, forensic testing revealed a single particle of gunshot residue. According to a senior forensic scientist, one particle was not enough to confirm who fired the weapon, but its presence raised further questions and added more weight to the case. The evidence was not perfect, there were missing pieces, but the narrative presented in court described a situation filled with substance and fatal decisions. The jury was left to decide whether Aisha Jones had intended to kill Norman Sullivan. Some believed she acted out of fear and panic, caught in the heat of the moment. Others believed she knew exactly what she was doing. What seemed certain was that substance, pressure, and a toxic relationship had played a major part in what happened that day. After deliberating for 5 hours, the jury reached a decision. Aisha Jones was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, first-degree felony murder, especially aggravated robbery, and reckless endangerment. On April 25th, she was sentenced to life in prison. However, she showed no regret for her act. For Norman Sullivan's family, the verdict may bring some sense of justice, but no punishment can ever fill the void left behind. For Aisha Jones, a single decision changed the course of her life forever. Whether it was a tragic mistake or a conscious act, the result remains the same. One life was lost, and another was destroyed in the process. Our next case turns love into obsession. A woman who confessed to a cold and calculated murder with chilling calm.
I may be just totally off my rocker, but I was just out walking my dog, and I came across some bones that looked to me to be human.
He had been dismembered.
Oh my God.
Okay.
On a cold January afternoon in Ohio, someone taking a quiet walk through Grand Lake State Park made a discovery that would haunt the area for years. Near the shoreline, human remains were found, left out in the open as if discarded. This wasn't just a disturbing find, it was the beginning of a mystery that would take years to solve. It all began in 2015 when 21-year-old Ryan Zimmerman moved to Columbus, Ohio, hoping for a fresh start. He had been communicating online with a married couple, Naria Jenna Whitaker and her wife, Sarah Buzzard, as well as Naria's then husband, after responding to a Craigslist ad. What started as a casual conversation soon developed into something more. Eventually, Ryan was invited to live with them, entering into what could only be described as a complex four-way relationship. But what began as an unconventional arrangement quickly turned dark. Sarah's emotions spiraled out of control. The relationship caused tension between her and her husband. And before long, Sarah had decided Ryan was the reason her marriage was falling apart. On January 5th, 2016, human remains were discovered near a lake in Mercer County, Ohio. Parts of the body were missing, making identification difficult. For years, the victim's identity remained a mystery, leaving both investigators and the community searching for answers. In 2020, DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Ryan Zimmerman. Investigators determined he was last seen on September 25, 2015. After that, he never contacted his family again. His car was later found impounded. It appeared he had simply vanished. In 2021, investigators arrested Sarah Buzzard. When they arrived at her home in Marion, Indiana, her new wife, Naria Whitaker, tragically took her own life before she could be taken into custody. Sarah eventually confessed to the unthinkable. She said that after an argument with Ryan, she knocked him down and strangled him. Even after he lost consciousness, she kept squeezing until she was sure he was dead. Then, with Whitaker's help, she dismembered the body and stuffed the pieces into bags. They didn't stop there. Sarah drove Ryan's remains around in her car, dumping parts in dumpsters and gas stations across the state. The car was sold, but later tracked down and searched by police, revealing key evidence that sealed her fate. According to prosecutors, Sarah believed Ryan had destroyed her marriage. She was furious, jealous, and spiraling emotionally. Her husband had checked into a hotel that weekend, leaving her home alone with Ryan. That's when she acted on her rage. Her confession confirmed that she blamed Ryan for everything and took matters into her own hands. In December 2021, Sarah pleaded guilty, and in January 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Her list of charges was staggering: murder, kidnapping, mistreatment of a corpse, and more. She stood in court and called herself a flawed person, but the prosecutor didn't hold back. "We're all flawed," he said, "but only one person in this room committed aggravated murder." Ryan's family waited years for answers. What they received was not justice, but tragedy. A son lost, a life destroyed, a senseless act carried out by someone he trusted. Our next case is chilling, where greed drove a woman to poison the man she once loved.
My husband's really sick. He got heat stroke yesterday, and now he's not waking up. And come on, wake up!
What's the phone number you're calling from?
In a North Dakota town, a story began that felt more like a movie than real life. A woman, a dream of a $30 million inheritance, and a betrayal so cold it tore a family apart. This is the case of Ina Thea Knoyer and how she poisoned the man she claimed to love. It all began in early September 2023, Ina Knoyer, 48, had been in a long-term relationship with Stephen Edward Riley Jr., a 51-year-old father and brother who believed he was about to receive a massive inheritance worth $30 million. Stephen was excited. He was planning to meet an attorney at the Minot airport to finalize everything, but instead of celebrating, everything took a dark turn. Stephen suddenly became seriously ill on the day of the meeting. Ina told others he was suffering from heat stroke and brought him home to rest. She even claimed he had visited a clinic the next day, but there was no record of any visit. Stephen's condition continued to worsen. On September 5th, Stephen was rushed to the hospital unconscious. He never regained consciousness and passed away later that day. His friends and family immediately raised concerns. They remembered that Ina had made disturbing comments in the past about poisoning Stephen with antifreeze. Even before doctors revealed anything, Ina was already telling people Stephen had been poisoned. An autopsy confirmed the suspicion. Stephen had toxic levels of ethylene glycol in his system, a chemical found in antifreeze. The poison had been mixed into the drinks Ina gave him. At their home, police found a beer bottle, a mug, and even an old Windex container with traces of the same toxic substance. As investigators dug deeper, the motive became clear. Ina knew about the supposed inheritance, but Stephen, according to friends, had plans to end the relationship once he received the money. However, she believed that if Stephen died, she might be able to collect the money. But it was all based on a lie. Investigators later said there was no real evidence that the inheritance ever existed. The man Stephen had been communicating with was never identified. Despite this, Ina poisoned him and kept him from receiving medical help in time. Greed was at the heart of it all. Ina believed she was about to become a millionaire. She even said she would split the money with Stephen's son. But when investigators told her she would receive nothing, her attitude changed. That was when the truth began to unfold. On October 30th, 2023, Ina was arrested and charged with murder. Yet, she showed no remorse for her actions. She first pleaded not guilty, then changed her plea. In May 2024, she accepted a deal: 50 years in prison. She would serve 25 years, followed by 10 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to Stephen's grieving family. Stephen's sister and son gave emotional statements in court. His sister Stephanie said their 71-year-old mother would now live the rest of her life in sorrow. Through tears, she called Ina a person with no soul and said the punishment would never feel like enough. Stephen's son Ryan said the loss had devastated their entire family. He had just started to rebuild a relationship with his father. Now, that chance was gone forever. He said he could not find words strong enough to describe the pain. When asked to speak, Ina remained silent. No apology, no expression, no remorse. Our next case is a pure nightmare where jealousy turned lethal and a man was killed in his sleep.
Human beings make mistakes, but you did not accidentally murder my father.
On a cold January day in Sandown, New Hampshire, a quiet neighborhood woke up to news that would shake the entire community. A man was found dead in his home, shot in the head while he slept. And the person responsible is someone he once loved. This is the heartbreaking case of Nicole LeBlanc and the murder of her ex-boyfriend, Richard Mannion Jr. Nicole LeBlanc and Richard Mannion had a troubled past. Their relationship had already ended, and Nicole had even been charged with assaulting him the previous summer. That led to a no-contact order, but even with legal boundaries in place, Nicole refused to let go. On January 14th, Nicole entered Richard's home while he was sleeping in his bedroom. She picked up a pistol and aimed it at his head. The first time she pulled the trigger, the gun didn't fire, but instead of walking away, she cocked the weapon and tried again. This time, the bullet fired and killed 43-year-old Richard instantly. Nicole didn't confess immediately, but what she didn't know was that one of her friends, Dennis Johnson, was working with law enforcement. He wore a wire during a lunch meeting, and Nicole confessed everything: how she planned the murder and how she carried it out. In court, Nicole finally admitted the truth. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Her chilling confession shocked the courtroom. But the most emotional moment came when Richard's family members stood to speak. Though Nicole never gave a clear reason, Prosecutors believe she simply couldn't accept that their relationship was over. Even with a no-contact order in place, she chose conflict instead of walking away. And that choice cost a man his life. The judge called Nicole a coward and a callous murderer. He accepted the plea deal, but made it clear that justice had to be served. Nicole LeBlanc was sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. The courtroom sat in silence as the judge told her she deserved every day of this sentence. Richard Mannion's sister, Cindy, spoke through tears. She said their lives would never be the same, and that Nicole had never considered how her actions would affect the victim's family and friends. Next up, a woman who used jealousy as a weapon. Sharon Graham didn't just want her ex gone. She convinced someone else to do the dirty work for her.
She's just an evil woman, as far as I'm concerned. To take someone's life like that and plan it and execute it.
A grandmother with a secret, a man betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable, and a crime so gruesome it shocked seasoned detectives. Sharon Graham's story isn't just one of greed, it's one of calculated, cold-blooded murder. Her target? Her ex-partner Bruce Saunders, whose kindness and trust would ultimately seal his fate. The tool? A wood chipper in a crime scene straight out of a nightmare. But how did Sharon, who seemed like an unassuming woman, mastermind such a brutal act? And how did her plan unravel? This case is as shocking as it is unforgettable.
Tonight, for the first time, what really happened in the so-called wood chipper murder.
We believe that man has been put in that machine, and it's foul play.
Bruce Saunders thought he was helping a friend in need. In November 2017, he agreed to assist Sharon Graham and her two acquaintances, Greg Roser and Peter Koenig, in clearing debris from a property in Goomboorian, Queensland. But what Bruce didn't realize was that he had walked straight into a deadly trap. What began as an ordinary day quickly descended into horror. As Bruce worked, Roser and Koenig attacked him, bludgeoning him with a metal bar. Sharon Graham wasn't at the scene, but her presence loomed over everything. She had orchestrated it all, manipulating the two men to carrying out her chilling plan. The motive? Greed. Sharon stood to gain $750,000 from Bruce's life insurance policy. She had convinced her accomplices that the payout would be worth the risk, using manipulation and lies to push them to commit murder. To cover their tracks, they staged Bruce's death as an accident. His body was fed into a wood chipper, reducing him to little more than fragments. The scene was so gruesome that even the most seasoned emergency responders were left shaken. But what investigators found next would expose Sharon's web of lies and unravel her deadly scheme.
But the police did doubt Sharon Graham's story, and when you hear what was really going on, it's no wonder why. You see, Sharon was living with Bruce Saunders at the time of his death, but she was also in a relationship with Greg Roser and a third man, Peter Koenig.
Initially, it seemed like the perfect crime. Bruce's death was reported as a tragic accident, a man simply caught in the machinery. But investigators noticed something unusual. Bruce's body didn't show the kind of injuries consistent with an accidental fall into the wood chipper. A closer examination revealed signs of a struggle. Blood spatter patterns suggested Bruce had been struck before his body was placed in the machine. Suspicion fell on Sharon, Greg, and Peter when inconsistencies emerged in their stories. Sharon's calm demeanor during questioning was unnerving. She claimed to be devastated by Bruce's death, yet her phone records told a different story. Just hours after the murder, she texted Greg and Peter, reminding them to stick to their story. The final piece of the puzzle came from a witness, a local farmer who had seen Greg and Peter acting suspiciously near the property on the day of Bruce's death. Armed with this testimony, detectives arrested all three suspects.
During a search of Roser's property, police uncovered 2 notes written by Roser, which detailed a previous plan to murder Bruce Saunders.
During the trial, the horrifying details of Sharon's scheme were laid bare. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of her as the mastermind, using manipulation and greed to drive the two men to commit murder. Greg Roser, who had wielded the metal bar, pleaded guilty and received a life sentence. Peter Koenig, who assisted in the attack, also faced life in prison. Sharon Graham's trial became a media sensation. Her cold, calculating demeanor in court shocked those following the case. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict, the judge didn't hold back, sentencing her to life in prison without parole. He called her actions a premeditated act of pure evil.
And the day I found out he was murdered, I couldn't believe it because he's such a nice person. And why people would do that for money.
In the courtroom, Bruce Saunders' friends and family could barely contain their heartbreak. He had been a kind and generous man, trusting the wrong person in Sharon Graham. To those who loved him, her betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was utterly unfathomable. She didn't just kill Bruce, she destroyed everyone who cared about him. The judge called the crime one of the most horrific he had ever presided over, emphasizing the profound impact it had on the community. For investigators, the case served as a chilling reminder of how greed can drive people to commit unimaginable acts of cruelty. Sharon's life sentence confirms she will never harm anyone again. But for Bruce's loved ones, the pain of his brutal death and the betrayal by someone he trusted will linger forever.
Our next case stunned the nation. Susan Smith claimed her children were kidnapped, but the truth was far more horrifying.
God gives us free choice, and she made free choice that night to end her life. This wasn't a tragic mistake. It wasn't something that she didn't mean to.
On October 25, 1994, Susan Smith called the police in Union, South Carolina, with a heart-wrenching claim. She said a man had carjacked her vehicle, taking her 2 young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 1-year-old Alexander, with him. The world was captivated as Susan appeared on national TV, tearfully begging for her children's safe return. For 9 long days, the nation watched and waited, clinging to the hope that Susan Smith's 2 little boys, Michael and Alexander, would be found safe. Susan, their heartbroken mother, appeared on television, pleading tearfully for their return. Her sorrow seemed genuine, and the world rallied behind her. But behind the grief-stricken face lay a disturbing secret. From the very beginning, investigators sensed something wasn't right. They carefully analyzed Susan's story and found key inconsistencies. One glaring issue was her description of the supposed carjacking. Susan claimed she had been stopped at a red light in an empty intersection when a man forced her out of the car and drove off with her children. However, investigators quickly realized the traffic light wouldn't have turned red unless another vehicle had been present, something Susan never mentioned.
Susan Smith is convicted for their deaths and sentenced to 30 years in prison.
As the pressure mounted, Susan broke down and confessed. The heartbreaking truth emerged. She had driven her car to John D. Long Lake with her sons strapped in their car seats. She let the car roll into the water, drowning her children. Her shocking motive is that she wanted to start a new life with a wealthy man who didn't want kids. It was a revelation that shattered the nation. The discovery of Michael and Alexander's bodies in the lake left the nation heartbroken. For days, people had hoped the little boys would be found safe. But that hope was shattered when their lifeless bodies were recovered from the depths of John D. Long Lake. Susan Smith's car, submerged 122 feet from the shore, became a haunting symbol of the crime. When questioned, Susan claimed she had been overwhelmed by emotional pain and insisted she hadn't planned to harm her children. Her confession shocked everyone who had watched her tearful public pleas just days before. In 1995, Susan's trial gripped the nation. Her defense team described her as a deeply troubled woman battling severe depression, trying to explain how a mother could commit such a terrible act. They argued she wasn't thinking clearly and was overwhelmed by despair. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They claimed Susan's actions were calculated, motivated by her desire to pursue a relationship with a man who didn't want children. After hearing all the evidence, it took the jury just 2.5 hours to reach a verdict: guilty of 2 counts of murder.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children.
Though prosecutors sought the death penalty, the jury sentenced Susan to life in prison with the chance of parole after 30 years. She remains incarcerated at the Leith Correctional Institution, where her 2024 parole request was denied.
Has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander.
As the judge announced Susan's sentence, a profound sense of shame clouded her features. Her voice trembled as she spoke, acknowledging the horribleness of her actions. With a tear-streaked face, she admitted how deeply remorseful she felt for what she had done, especially to her children. Her hands clenched as if holding on to the remnants of the guilt that weighed her down.
And I love Michael and Alex with all my heart.
The case of Susan Smith is a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of a desperate mind. It's a story that still stirs deep sorrow and outrage, leaving a scar on the hearts of all who remember.
Now she wants a chance to be free after only serving 30 years. No. Life should mean life.
The Susan Smith case shook the nation's trust to its core, but the next case reveals a reckless action that forever changed lives. Breaking news: Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description.
Or you're stone cold sober and you have a seizure every single day, and yet you still choose to get in a car and drive. I honestly don't know which one is worse.
On August 10th, 2017, a tragic crash occurred on the Leroy-Shellman Expressway in Tampa, Florida. That day, Louise and Rita Philippak, along with their 8-year-old daughter, Georgia, lost their lives in an accident that shook the community. At the center of this devastation was 31-year-old Amber Pereira, whose actions would forever alter countless lives. On a tragic night, Amber Pereira was speeding down the road in her Kia, driving at an alarming 120 miles per hour. In a split second, she collided with the back of the Philippak family's Hyundai, sending their car spinning across the median into oncoming traffic. The car crashed into 2 other vehicles before bursting into flames. Sadly, the Philippak family, 3 members in total, lost their lives at the scene. Another driver was also injured in the chaos. Instead of stopping to offer help, Amber continued driving, not realizing the gravity of what had just happened. She drove for 2 more miles before her car broke down. When authorities caught up with her, they discovered that Amber's blood alcohol level was far above the legal limit, and there were also traces of cannabis in her system. This devastating accident took the lives of an entire family and left another person severely injured. The consequences of Amber's reckless actions would be felt by everyone who loved the Philippak family, and the community was left in shock over the preventable tragedy. It serves as a sobering reminder of how driving under the influence can lead to irreversible, heartbreaking consequences.
Moments ago, Amber Pereira found out how long she'll spend in prison for killing a family in a deadly crash.
During the investigation, Amber Pereira tried to explain the crash by claiming she had suffered a seizure just before the collision. However, the evidence told a different story. Data from her car's recorder revealed that she had made several attempts to steer and avoid the impact, suggesting she was fully aware of what was happening at the time. After the crash, Amber was taken to the hospital, but even there, she tried to hide blood samples in an attempt to avoid further legal trouble. Her actions only added to the growing mountain of evidence against her. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Amber's reckless driving, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had led to the tragic deaths of 3 innocent people and the serious injury of another. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Amber finally pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 3 counts of DUI manslaughter and leaving the scene of a crash involving death. Her guilty plea marked the beginning of a long legal battle, but the consequences of her actions were already painfully clear. This tragedy serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating impact of impaired driving and the importance of being responsible behind the wheel.
The emotion got the best of Amber Pereira throughout the 3-hour hearing. At times, she dropped her head into her hands in despair.
On October 22, 2019, Circuit Judge Christopher Sabella sentenced Pereira to 50 years in prison. While her attorney argued for leniency, citing her minimal criminal history, the judge and the victim's family felt justice demanded a harsher sentence.
Sentenced the 31-year-old to 5 decades behind bars.
Your life is ruined, but you also ruined a lot of lives and ended 3 lives.
As the judge's words echoed through the courtroom, a wave of emotion swept over Amber, her heart heavy with guilt. The weight of each sentence sank deep into her soul, and tears began to fall. Every word seemed to magnify her regret, the burden of her actions pressing down on her more than ever.
Moments ago, Amber Pereira found out how long she'll spend in prison for killing a family in a deadly crash.
This tragic story leaves a lasting impact, reminding us of the irreversible consequences of reckless decisions. For the Philippak family, no sentence could bring back their loved ones. For Pereira, her life is now a stark reflection of the cost of one fateful choice.
Not going to make it through the crash, and that my children were going to lose their mother.
Amber's reckless driving highlights how quickly tragedy can strike. But the next story takes manipulation and betrayal to an even darker level.
Because of a prison writing group saying that deflecting blame was a coping mechanism.
On May 1st, 1990, Pamela Smart returned to her New Hampshire home to find her condo ransacked and her husband, Gregory Smart, brutally murdered. To everyone around her, Pamela appeared to be a grieving widow, shocked by the apparent burglary gone wrong. However, the police soon unraveled a chilling truth hidden behind her composed exterior. At the age of 22, Pamela found herself in a complicated relationship with a much younger Billy Flynn, who was only 15 years old. Billy, feeling deeply connected to Pamela, was manipulated by her into doing something he never imagined. Pamela, in a bid to end her unhappy marriage, convinced Billy that her love depended on him taking drastic action. She told him she would withhold affection unless he helped her remove her husband, Gregory, from the picture. Billy, overwhelmed by his emotions, turned to his 3 friends for assistance. Together, they hatched a plan, and one fateful night, Billy shot Gregory while one of his friends, Randall, held him down. The scene initially appeared as though a robbery had gone wrong, but as detectives pieced together the details, they started to see a different story. A breakthrough came when Pamela's co-worker, Cecilia Pierce, stepped in to help. Wearing a wire, Cecilia recorded Pamela's own words, which revealed the truth behind the crime. This critical evidence helped investigators uncover the shocking truth and brought Pamela's manipulation to light, leading to her eventual arrest.
Well, we went upstairs, Pete and I, and right into Pam's room. We started dumping out the drawers and everything, so it would look like a burglary.
Pamela's trial grabbed the attention of the entire nation because it was one of the first in U.S. history to allow cameras in the courtroom. The prosecutors argued that Pamela was a manipulative person who used her charm to control a vulnerable teenager, Billy Flynn. They claimed she wanted to avoid a messy divorce and take advantage of her husband's $140,000 life insurance policy. Pamela's defense team argued that she didn't know about the murder plot and had no part in it. However, the recordings made by her co-worker, Cecilia, and the testimonies from Billy and his friends told a different story. These pieces of evidence showed that Pamela had played a big role in planning the crime. After a trial that lasted 14 days, the jury found Pamela guilty of being an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with no chance of ever being released. Pamela's case became a cautionary tale about manipulation and the dangerous consequences of taking advantage of others.
Is that Cecilia Pierce and Bill Flynn are having all these conversations about the murder of your husband, which you know absolutely nothing about. Is that it?
Yes, they testified to that also.
To this day, Pamela maintains her innocence, claiming she never wanted her husband dead. However, her life behind bars has been tumultuous. From enduring a violent assault by fellow inmates to being the subject of media documentaries, Pamela remains a controversial figure. In March 2023, her last appeal for a sentence reduction was denied, sealing her fate to live out her days in prison. During the whole trial, Pamela showed no remorse for her act.
Who is from New Hampshire is serving a life sentence without parole for plotting with a 15-year-old to kill her husband back in 1990. William Flynn served a 25-year sentence for the shooting death.
Was killing your husband one of those mistakes?
No, it wasn't.
Acknowledged for the first time in my own, mind and my own heart how responsible I was.
Along with it, Billy also gets emotional and says sorry to Gregory's family for what he did. The story of Pamela Smart left many in shock and disbelief.
I felt a tremendous amount of shame.
The case serves as a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of manipulation, betrayal, and blind infatuation. While Gregory's life was tragically cut short, the ripple effects of his crime continue to haunt everyone involved. Pamela Smart's cunning manipulation left lives in ruins, but the next case unveils a chilling story of betrayal that cuts even deeper.
You've caused untold damage to our lives, yours, and others.
On November 14, 2020, the quiet town of Casco Township in Allegan County was rocked by a horrifying discovery. A charred vehicle, near which lay the burned remains of 25-year-old David Silverlight, was found. What initially seemed like a tragic accident quickly turned into a murder investigation that unveiled dark secrets and a deadly conspiracy. David Silverlight, a resident of the South Haven area, had once been in a relationship with Allison Martin. Although their romantic relationship had ended, Allison's connection to David remained in unexpected ways. When David's body was discovered, burned and abandoned, police quickly suspected something was wrong. It didn't seem like an accident, and they soon began looking into the people who were closest to him. As the investigation unfolded, authorities began to suspect Allison and her friend Justin Terpstra were involved. The two were eventually linked to the crime, and it became clear that something far darker had taken place. Allison, at 23 years old, and Justin, at 25, were both arrested and charged with open murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The charges they faced were serious, as they carried the chance of life in prison. The community was shocked by the crime, and the case would later be a reminder of how even familiar relationships can sometimes take a dangerous turn. Investigators continued their work to understand the full story behind David's tragic death. The investigation into David Silverlight's death uncovered some truly unsettling details. Just 4 days after his body was found, it was confirmed that David had been murdered. It turned out that Allison Martin and her friend Justin Terpstra had made a deadly plan together. They decided to kill David and try to hide the evidence by burning his body along with his car. The news of the crime sent shockwaves through the community, leaving many in disbelief that something so tragic could happen so close to home. David's family was heartbroken, struggling to understand why anyone would harm him. As the case moved forward, it became even more difficult to process. During the preliminary hearings, Allison was evaluated and found to be mentally fit to stand trial. This development added even more weight to the case, as it became clear that the crime had been carefully planned and carried out. The community, along with David's loved ones, hoped for justice as they watched the case unfold. The shocking event served as a reminder of how quickly relationships can turn dark, and how important it is to stay vigilant about the people we trust.
The life sentence without parole was prescribed by law, so today's hearing is mostly a chance for Brandon Silverlight's family to vent their anger on the woman they say.
Allison's preliminary hearing concluded that there was enough evidence to move the case to trial. Although Justin's hearing was delayed due to competency evaluations, both defendants would eventually face the full extent of the law for their heinous crime. At the time of the hearing, Allison gets emotional and starts crying. This case is a haunting reminder of how relationships, when marred by conflict and malice, can take a dark turn. David's tragic death left a void in his loved ones' lives, while the community of Casco Township was left grappling with the horror of what had unfolded in their midst. Justice for David now lies in the hands of the courts, but the emotional scars left behind will take far longer to heal.
Yeah, he was a really nice guy, really friendly, outgoing. He was really into playing drums. I believe he played with the University of Western Michigan marching band. He also taught marching percussion to high school students, and that was really one of his passions.
Next, we examine the case of Hannah Payne, a seemingly ordinary citizen whose decision to take justice into her own hands led to a fatal encounter with life-altering consequences.
Hannah Payne's eyes filled with tears as Clayton County Judge Jules Scott gave the convicted killer life for the malice murder charge.
We head to Clayton County, where Hannah Payne, a 25-year-old woman from Georgia and, according to the court, tried covering up her crime with the most ridiculous lie ever told. Payne allegedly took it upon herself to administer justice on the 62-year-old Kenneth Herring. In the month of May 2019, Mr. Herring had hit a trailer that was carrying legal firearms, and without notifying the police, he drove off. Hannah Payne, who was nearby, saw this incident and decided to follow Mr. Herring for about a mile before pulling him over. She called 911 to report this issue, and over the phone she was heard yelling at Mr. Herring. She eventually shot him and claimed that he took her gun and shot himself with it. Payne was more or less a passerby in this case. She could have called the police and waited for them to arrive before reporting the case. She decided to take matters into her own hands by playing the role of a police officer, and this landed her in huge trouble. It was later reported in the news from 11 Alive News that the reason Mr. Herring had fled from the scene where he hit the trailer was because he was in the middle of a medical emergency, likely a diabetic shock. Miss Payne was charged to court where she was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after she was found guilty on all counts of felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm, and false imprisonment earlier in the week according to WSB TV. During the hearing, Miss Payne lied against the deceased, claiming he grabbed her and mashed on the brake in an attempt to get her off. Furthermore, she claimed that at some point, Herring started revving his engine and pulled away from the scene of the initial crash. In her testimony, she stated that she was speaking with a 911 dispatcher at the time, who inquired as to whether she had managed to obtain his license plate number. She claimed that she got in her car as soon as she realized she hadn't, and assumed no one else had either. Terry Robinson, the man she thought was the state cop, instructed her to go, implying that he wanted her to follow Herring, she testified in court. 4 years later, another trial was held. The family of the 62-year-old Kenneth Herring say they have been waiting 4 years for that day. The sisters of the deceased were emotional after coming out of the courtroom. They waited 4 years to get justice for their brother. Vicki Lynn Herring, Kenneth's youngest sister, emotionally expressed the profound impact of her brother's loss.
I no longer have a big brother. His grandchildren won't know him. He has 2 adult children that they don't have a father anymore. There were 6 of us. Now there's the 5 of us that are left.
Jacqueline Herring, another sister, fondly remembered her brother as someone who would playfully boss around his siblings.
Where he got a life without parole, I would like for her to have life without parole.
Rena Novotny, a friend of the Paynes, spoke in defense of Hannah, sharing the emotional struggles she has faced, especially when dealing with cancer in her family. Despite the national attention the case garnered, Clayton County District Attorney Tasha Mosley clarified that she doesn't believe the murder was race-related. Mosley called the sentence a success, pointing out that Payne would still serve a minimum of 43 years without the chance of release. After days of testimony in a Clayton County courtroom, prosecutors and Hannah Payne's defense attorney had one final chance on Tuesday to make their case to the jury before deliberations got underway. In 2019, Payne was accused by prosecutors of playing cop when they claimed she pursued 62-year-old Kenneth Herring from the site of an accident in which she had no direct involvement. Throughout the trial, jurors heard a lot, including 911 calls and Payne's interview with the police, among other things. Payne's and other witnesses' evidence was also heard by them. Payne testified at the murder trial on her own behalf. She claimed to have witnessed the first crash, which included the presence of a state officer. She asserted that the witness at the scene and the officer informed her directly that Herring was drunk. The defense contends that Payne acted in self-defense because she alleges Herring began hitting her after she confronted him. Tucker claims that Payne was only attempting to assist after seeing a collision. During Tuesday afternoon's state closing statements, the lead prosecutor stated, Kenneth Herring, who was unarmed and minding his own business, was chased down, detained, shot, and murdered. After listening to Payne's statement, her lawyer was given an opportunity for a redirect examination. The lesson to be learned in this is very clear, and that is minding one's business and not taking laws into our own hands. Let the cops do their work. If Miss Payne had gone about her day, she wouldn't have landed herself in this hot mess. Mr. Kenneth Herring, an innocent man, shouldn't have died the way he did, no matter what. Miss Payne deserves her sentence of life in prison with the possibility of release. Even the general public's response favors the court. Some even prayed for Payne's offenses to carry a harsher sentence. Together, let's dive into this intriguing story and unravel the mystery as to why this Karen would take her neighbor's life.
The video released tonight confirms that the deadly confrontation between Susan Lorenz and A.J. Owens was far from their first encounter. Now, take a look. The video shows Marion County deputies talking with Lorenz several times on separate occasions after she called in complaints. Now, in one case, she called to report that Owens' children were being loud outside while she was working.
Lorenz is a 58-year-old white woman, and she lives right next to the family of the Owens. Mrs. Ajike Owens is a 35-year-old woman and a mother of 4 children. Before the death of Mrs. Owens, Lorenz had called the police multiple times on different occasions complaining about the Owens, her children, and other neighbors. Her complaints were about trespassing, noise from the neighbors, and to the kids calling her a Karen. Lorenz claimed that she had been bullied by the children. She told the deputy that she doesn't want to feel intimidated or get yelled at by them screaming and yelling at her, telling her that she's a calling her Karen. This was seen in video late August 2022. Lorenz would always tell the parents that there are other places their children can play, and in return the parents would tell her the kids aren't hurting anyone or causing any damage. There have been several videos showing where Lorenz was seen yelling at the kids, with insensitive remarks and hurtful words. 6 children attested to the fact that Lorenz had been aggressive towards the Owens, yelling profanities and hurtful words at them. Other neighbors also reported extreme acts of intolerance exhibited by Lorenz, such as getting in her car and revving it in retaliation when children and barking dogs bothered her, and parking her truck near areas where the children were playing and setting off her car alarm. Also in November 2022, on a recorded phone call, Lorenz was heard calling her neighbors hooligans. What broke the backbone of it all happened on the 2nd of June. Ajike went up to the Ocala home of Lorenz after learning that she had been to Ajike's house and took the kid's iPad and threw roller skates at them. After several knocks from Ajike and no response, Lorenz shot AJ through the closed door and AJ died. Susan Louise Lorenz was charged with manslaughter with a firearm, culpable negligence, violence, and 2 counts of assault, and was identified as Owens' killer. On July 11th, she pleaded not guilty. Authorities stated that they wanted to ascertain what part Florida's stand your ground laws played in the shooting before ordering Lawrence's arrest 4 days after the incident. According to the Marion County Sheriff's Office, Owens and her neighbor had a recurring argument about her kids crossing her property. Officials stated that Owens' children had been playing in a field close to the shooter's residence before the shooting started. One of the kids dropped his iPad on the floor, and the suspect is said to have snatched it. Mr. Diaz told MSNBC, "The white woman had it, would not give it back to my grandson," adding that the suspect was allegedly using profanity. Like any other child, he went home to tell his mother, "My daughter just knocked on the door." Police were notified by witnesses that the suspect had reportedly thrown roller skates at Owens' children, which prompted the mother of four to confront her at her door. Lawrence even went as far as telling the deputy that she is like the perfect neighbor and does not bother anyone at all. Lawrence, who stated she shot Owens out of fear for her life, has not had murder charges brought against her by Florida authorities. Rather, she faces 1 charge of assault and 1 count of manslaughter with a handgun. According to Florida State Attorney William Bill Gladson, Lawrence did not demonstrate the depraved mind necessary to distinguish second-degree murder from manslaughter under state statutes. Depraved mind requires evidence of hatred, spite, ill will, or evil intent towards the victim at the time of the killing, Gladson said. As deplorable as the defendant's actions were in this case, there is insufficient evidence to prove the specific and required elements of second-degree murder. Lawrence could actually face up to 30 years in prison. A judge granted a $154,000 bond with the condition that she wear an ankle monitor and stay away from the Owens family. This case, however, begs the question of whether or not this Floridian jury acted out of prejudice or was just in giving their verdict, considering the evidence tendered. Also, could Lawrence's action have been seen as just a defensive act or violence in an unreasonable circumstance? Our next case looks like a simple family tragedy until Isabella Martinez made decisions that shattered trust forever.
I don't need an attorney.
You don't need an attorney?
No.
Well, I beg to disagree with you. You have a right to represent yourself. In our Constitution, you have a right to represent yourself.
On July 6, 2017, a chilling 911 call was made from a home in Loganville, Georgia. When Gwinnett County Police arrived at the scene, they found a tragic sight: 5 lives lost. The victims included her husband, Martin Romero, 33, and their 4 children: Isabella, 10, Dakota, 7, Dylan, 4, and Axel, 2. A 5th child, Diana, 9, had also been stabbed but survived after undergoing emergency surgery. The Romero family had recently moved into a quiet neighborhood in Loganville, Georgia. By all accounts, they seemed like a happy and close-knit family. The children were often seen playing with friends and were described by neighbors as bright and full of potential. However, beneath this peaceful appearance, tragedy was brewing. Isabella Martinez, the mother, reportedly sank into a deep depression after the death of her father, which seemed to change everything. On July 16, 2017, the unimaginable happened. Isabel made a 911 call admitting she had stabbed her husband and children. When police arrived, they found 5 family members dead and another child, Diana, critically injured but alive. The shock didn't end there. During her first court appearance, Isabel behaved in ways that puzzled everyone. She smiled for the cameras, gave a double thumbs up, and even knelt in a prayer-like pose. Her actions baffled the court and viewers alike. The judge sternly told her to stop, but she shook her head and laughed. When asked about legal representation, Isabel refused an attorney, saying her faith and the people would defend her. It was a chilling display in a case that left a community heartbroken and searching for answers.
A Georgia prosecutor will not seek the death penalty for a woman charged with stabbing her husband and 4 children to death. 34-year-old Isabel Martinez pled not guilty to all charges in a Gwinnett County courthouse today.
The police quickly launched a thorough investigation after the devastating discovery in Loganville. They uncovered that Isabel Martinez had brutally stabbed her family in the early hours of the morning. Shockingly, she confessed to the crimes without hesitation. However, what happened in the courtroom left everyone even more baffled. During her sentencing, Isabel's behavior was nothing short of bizarre. She smiled, waved to the cameras, and even gave a double thumbs up.
Smiling the creepiest smile, gave the jury a thumbs up, and started moving as if she was praying.
She swayed in her seat, held her hands together in a prayer gesture, and appeared completely detached from the severity of the situation. Her strange reactions unsettled everyone present, including the judge, who had to warn her to stop performing for the cameras. Many people began to question what could have driven her to commit such a horrific act. Some experts speculated that Isabel might have been struggling with severe mental health issues, perhaps triggered by the recent loss of her father. Others were left wondering how such an unimaginable tragedy could happen in a seemingly normal, happy family.
I just went cold. I couldn't believe that what had happened. I mean, when they said that there had been a tragedy, I thought maybe a car accident or something.
After a thorough trial where she showed bizarre reactions to her act, Isabel Martinez was convicted of 5 counts of murder, aggravated assault, and child cruelty. She received a life sentence with the chance of parole plus 21 years.
To cut out the display for the cameras,
The loss devastated the community, leaving family, friends, and neighbors grappling with an unimaginable tragedy. The surviving child, Diana, faced a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally. For many, this case serves as a stark reminder of the hidden pain that can lead to unimaginable actions. Breaking news: Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description. Isabel's brutal attack on her family is impossible to forget. The next case shows the tragic loss of a daughter, leaving us questioning a mother's unimaginable actions.
Just be careful and watch out who you're talking to and watch out who's around you and be suspicious of everything.
On a cold November day in 2014, a tragedy unfolded in Nashua, New Hampshire that would leave a lasting impact on the community. Caitlin Marin, a 27-year-old mother, was convicted of killing her 3-year-old daughter, Brielle Gage. The details of the case were so heart-wrenching that they would haunt everyone involved. Brielle Gage was a sweet, innocent little girl whose life ended far too soon. During Thanksgiving week in 2014, she suffered severe injuries that took her life, leaving her family and community devastated. At first, her mother, Caitlin Marin, claimed that Brielle had fallen down the stairs, but the truth was far more heartbreaking. Investigators soon uncovered a different story, revealing that Brielle had been subjected to unimaginable mistreatment. She had been kicked, punched, and even slammed against a wall. The injuries on her small body told a harrowing tale. Over 50 bruises and wounds showed just how much she had endured. Prosecutors explained that Marin's anger had spiraled out of control. They said she became enraged when Brielle had wet herself and later went to the kitchen at night to find food. What should have been simple moments of childhood became the trigger for a violent outburst.
You just can't keep the story straight. The only person afraid of the truth is her, Judge. And why? Because the truth is she's a killer.
Despite all the evidence, Marin insisted she was innocent. She chose to stand trial without a jury, putting her fate in the hands of a judge. The tragic loss of Brielle and the circumstances surrounding her death left the community in shock. During the trial, Senior Assistant Attorney General Jeff Strelzin painted a grim picture of Caitlin Marin, calling her a skilled and manipulative liar. He explained how Marin had carefully tried to cover her tracks, but the truth of what happened to her 3-year-old daughter, Brielle Gage, could not be hidden. The courtroom was heavy with sorrow as the details of Brielle's slow and painful death were revealed. Prosecutors shared how the little girl suffered more than 50 injuries, leaving everyone in shock and disbelief. Among those present was Martin's mother, Kathleen Emery. She bravely spoke to the court, her voice filled with heartbreak and sorrow. Kathleen expressed her deep pain, not only for the loss of her beloved granddaughter, but also for her daughter, Caitlin. She mourned the reality that Caitlin would now spend the rest of her life behind bars, far from the life she once knew.
Mom says, no, Ma, don't touch her, don't talk to her. Her doctor said when she cries for no reason, you can't acknowledge her.
The tragedy of Brielle's death left a lasting impact on everyone. In December 2016, Marin was found guilty of second-degree murder. Judge Charles S. Temple sentenced her to 45 years to life in prison. He called Brielle's death horrific and expressed hope that her tragic story would serve as a wake-up call for society to better protect its children, while Marin showed no remorse.
I feel sorry. This is the rest of her life in prison.
Judge Temple called Brielle's death horrific.
And they say while she did talk to police before she was read her rights.
That's why when you get to the station, you don't tell her, you don't have to talk to me.
No.
And that's why you don't make any efforts to provide to her a phone to contact her attorney.
Brielle's death was a devastating reminder of how fragile and precious life is, especially for children. It sparked changes in child protection laws in New Hampshire, ensuring that Brielle's suffering would not be in vain. Though justice was served, the community will forever mourn the loss of a little girl whose life was stolen far too soon.
Pray for her family, for her siblings, because they have to live through it.
Caitlin's ruthless murder shocked the community. The next case shows an unspeakable cruelty that took us into a tragedy that took 2 young lives.
I
I just received a call from my child's mother that two of my youngest two dead babies, my sons, are dead in an apartment.
In 2017, a heartbreaking and horrific tragedy unfolded in Atlanta when Lamora Williams, a mother of 3, killed her 2 young sons, Jacarter and Keontae. The devastating incident shocked the community and left many struggling to comprehend how a mother could commit such an unspeakable act. Lamora Williams, a 24-year-old mother of 3, called emergency services in a state of panic, saying she had found her 2 young sons dead at home after leaving them with a caregiver. Lamora described a terrible scene to the 911 dispatcher, saying that the stove had fallen onto her youngest son's head, and her other son was found on the floor with what seemed to be severe injuries. She was frantic, asking for help and insisting that she didn't know what had happened. The situation seemed tragic, and the dispatcher could hear the desperation in her voice.
I'm so scared. I don't want to get locked up because I was at work.
Okay, ma'am.
I
understand that you're scared. I completely understand, but I need to get some help out there to you now.
As police arrived and began investigating, things started to look different. The details of the scene raised more questions. The officers found the children's bodies, and some marks seemed like burns. The investigation led to a shocking discovery. The 2 boys had been placed inside a tipped-over oven and left there for an extended period. This heartbreaking revelation changed everything, and the truth about what happened that tragic day began to emerge, leaving everyone in disbelief. As the investigation unfolded, the authorities began to uncover the heartbreaking truth about what had happened. The 2 young boys had died from severe burns, and the evidence suggested that their heads had been deliberately placed inside an oven that had been tipped over. The autopsy provided even more details, showing that the boys had been exposed to extreme heat for a long time before their tragic deaths. The burns they suffered were unlike any natural accident. All the evidence began to point towards Lamora Williams, the boys' mother. What had initially seemed like a tragic accident now looked like something far more sinister. The police and investigators worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened, and the truth about the mother's involvement in such an unimaginable crime slowly became undeniable, leaving everyone stunned and deeply saddened by the outcome.
We know she was in the building somewhere in a back room, but she chose not to appear directly in front of the judge, so you're looking at video from a previous court hearing.
Lamora Williams was arrested and charged with the murders of her 2 sons. In 2024, she was convicted on 14 counts and sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, in addition to an extra 35 years for other charges related to the case. Still, she shows no remorse for her actions. She chose to remain silent during the whole trial.
Of concealing a body and 1 charge of lying to police. Williams is accused of killing her 1-year-old and 2-year-old in October by putting them in a hot oven.
The case left the community in shock and sorrow, struggling to comprehend how a mother could carry out such an unimaginable crime against her children. The heartbreak was felt by all who followed the story, especially as Williams maintained her innocence, claiming mental health issues contributed to her actions.
And it's for them. And show them that we're there for him.
Lamora Williams' senseless violence shattered lives and left loved ones grappling with unimaginable loss. The next case shows how kindness can quickly turn into horror.
I am certain
de que siempre vivirá en nuestros corazones.
That she will always live in our heart.
This is the tragic story of Daniela Taveras, a 21-year-old woman whose life was abruptly cut short by an acquaintance she had just met. Daniela was killed in an unthinkable act of violence after a night out with friends from her gym, a night that was supposed to be full of fun and laughter. Daniela was a friendly, supportive member of a gym in Coral Springs, Florida. She was known for her kindness and easily made friends with everyone around her. One evening, during a gym outing, Daniela noticed that Yvonne Serrano, another gym member, had been drinking heavily. Serrano didn't seem to connect with the others, and Daniela, always the caring person, decided to offer her help. She offered to drive Serrano home after the night out. However, as the evening went on, Serrano's behavior became more intense and agitated. Her drunken state made everyone uncomfortable, and it became clear that she wasn't handling herself well. Despite the unsettling vibe, Daniela, trying to do the right thing, decided to drive Serrano home to make sure she was safe. But that decision would have devastating consequences. Hours later, police discovered Daniela's lifeless body in Serrano's driveway with a gunshot wound to her forehead. The investigation revealed the shocking truth, leaving everyone who knew Daniela in disbelief. What happened that night? What went so wrong?
Reduce the charges from second-degree murder, which would have carried a no-bond, whole bonding.
Prosecutors told the judge her soon-to-be ex-husband said when Serrano drinks, she blacks out.
The investigation into Daniela's death uncovered unsettling details. Yvonne Serrano, a woman with no criminal history, gave conflicting statements when questioned by the police. She first claimed that she didn't know how Daniela's body ended up in her driveway. Serrano told officers that she had found Daniela's car there when she was leaving for the gym, but her story began to change. As the investigation continued, Serrano admitted that she had been at the bar that night, drinking heavily. She told the police that she had blacked out, making her memory of the night fuzzy. Her story seemed inconsistent, and the authorities began to suspect her involvement. Further investigation revealed troubling evidence in Serrano's home. A gun was found, and there were signs that she had deleted footage from her Ring doorbell camera, which might have captured crucial moments. The discovery of this evidence raised more questions about Serrano's role in Daniela's tragic death. The inconsistencies in Serrano's statements, combined with the physical evidence, left investigators believing she had a part in what happened that fateful night. Daniela's family and friends were left searching for answers, trying to make sense of the tragedy that had stolen Daniela's life.
Or to give the suspect a ride home. She gave her a ride home. The vehicle pulls in the driveway, and at some point the suspect did shoot the victim and kill her.
Serrano was arrested and charged with murder and tampering with evidence. However, prosecutors later reduced the charges to manslaughter with a firearm, a lesser charge that carries a maximum 30-year sentence. Serrano pleaded not guilty, that she's not guilty of her act, leaving Daniela's family and friends devastated by the turn of events. Despite the change in charges, Daniela's mother, Isa, and those who knew Daniela continued to seek justice for her tragic death.
Good morning, Ms. Serrano. You're charged with 2 counts. The first is tampering or fabricating with physical evidence. The second is second-degree murder.
The story of Daniela Tabares' untimely death has left a deep emotional mark on her family and friends. Daniela's mother, Isa, finds herself grappling with anger and frustration, knowing that no matter what happens in court, her daughter will never return.
Estamos a la espera de la sentencia.
Isabel Tabares, the victim's mother, said she watched while a jury spent more than 2.5 days deliberating before arriving to the guilty verdict.
Yvonne's heinous case leaves everyone in shock and disbelief. The next case exposed shocking cruelty that caused irreversible damage.
Happen without her? Absolutely not. She's the way that they get into the apartment. She never would have opened the door for Michelle Lambert. She helps tackle her. She holds her down while Lambert's stabbing her to death.
In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a woman named Tabitha Buck was sentenced to life in prison for the 1991 murder of 16-year-old Lori Sho. Buck, just 17 years old at the time of the crime, along with her accomplice, Lisa Michelle Lambert, lured Sho's mother out of their apartment and brutally slashed Sho's throat. After nearly 28 years in prison, Tabitha Buck was recently released on parole, which has sparked a lot of debate and emotions. Tabitha Buck's story intertwines with Lori Sho's, which began as a typical tale of small-town life, but ended in an unthinkable tragedy. In the summer of 1991, Lori, a bright and kind teenager, briefly dated Lawrence Butch Youngkin. However, Lori later confided to her mother that Youngkin had harmed her. Their relationship ended, and Youngkin returned to Lisa Michelle Lambert, his pregnant ex-girlfriend. For Lambert, Lori became an obsession. Driven by jealousy, she began harassing Lori, showing up at her workplace and spreading rumors. Lambert's friend, Tabitha Buck, joined in the aggression. Buck physically attacked Lori multiple times, including a violent confrontation at a mall. Lambert's malice turned methodical. With Buck's help, she gathered information about Lori's schedule and obtained her phone number. On December 20th, 1991, Lori was brutally attacked at her home. Her mother, Hazel, had been lured away by a staged phone call. Lori sustained fatal injuries, but managed to identify Lambert as her killer before succumbing. Police arrested Lambert, Buck, and Youngkin that day. Lori's death remains a haunting reminder of how jealousy and hatred can spiral into violence. Tabitha Buck was granted parole after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that life sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. This ruling meant that her sentence was revisited, giving her a chance for release after serving nearly 28 years in prison. Some people believe that everyone deserves a second chance, especially those who were young when they committed their crimes. They feel that Tabitha's time in prison allowed her to change and learn from her mistakes. However, for the families affected by her actions, this decision is difficult to accept. The Sho family, in particular, is left facing old wounds as they remember the brutal crime that took Lori Sho's life.
But a very, very effective one, the odds of my client meeting a personality like that, I don't know, 1,000,000 to 1.
Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman shared how painful it has been for victims' families, even though the court was just following the law. The decision raises a complex issue. Should someone who committed a serious crime as a juvenile be given a second chance? While the law sees potential for rehabilitation, the emotional weight for those who have suffered from the crime remains heavy. This situation leaves everyone questioning the balance between justice, healing, and the hope for redemption. Tabitha Buck's parole was granted after she showed good behavior during her time in prison, completed programs to improve herself, and took responsibility for the crime she committed. Despite these positive steps, she must follow strict rules now that she's out. She's not allowed to have contact with anyone who uses substances or with the family of the victim, Lori Sho. She must also attend regular mental health evaluations and, importantly, she can't go back or even visit Lancaster County, where the crime happened. Some people believe that this is a fair chance for Buck to rebuild her life, especially since she was so young when she committed the crime. However, others feel unsure about whether someone who took the life of another person, especially so brutally, should be allowed back into society. For the victim's family and others affected, it's hard to accept that someone who caused so much pain could now be free. It's a complex situation where the law offers a second chance, but it still leaves many with mixed emotions and questions about justice and forgiveness.
Tabitha Buck was 17 years old when she was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal killing of 16-year-old Lori Sho in Lancaster County.
Tabitha Buck is now a free woman, but her release doesn't erase the trauma caused by her actions all those years ago. While she serves her parole under strict conditions, the emotional scars for the Sho family and others affected by the case remain. This case highlights the complexity of juvenile justice and whether it's possible for someone to truly change after committing such a crime.
The surviving family members were told that the sentence was final, and in cases like this, that it was life without parole. And
Tabitha's journey ahead will not only be one of legal challenges, but emotional healing for all involved. The emotional reaction to Buck's release is mixed. For some, it brings hope that people can change, even after making terrible mistakes. For others, it feels like a reminder of the deep pain caused by the loss of a young life. The release of someone who committed such a violent crime against another person is difficult for many to accept, particularly for the victim's family, who are left to process the hurt once again. You've just seen 54 moments where justice was served. Sometimes brutal, sometimes bizarre, but always unforgettable.